Yo, this is Court Bauer from MLW. Shout out to True Hill Heat. Give them a listen.
All right.
Alright, this is Dan House here, very nice, very evil. You are watching True Heel Heat. Probably should have had MJF do this, but here we are.
Rob Van Dam, listen to True Hill Heat. Pow.
Welcome to True Heel Heat, the place where we use insider terms because we think we know what the fuck we're talking about, even though we don't. My name's Maxwell Jacob Friedman, and I'm better than you, and you know it.
Hello. It is me, your True Hill Phenom, SP3. We are live on the True Hill Heat, YouTube, Facebook, and Romeo's Twitter for our Mr. McMahon Netflix Docuseries review, breaking down the 6-part series covering the life and career of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And I am joined to do this by my good friend here. You see him on the Around the Point Network. He is the 6th man for us over on Rated Raw Review on Tuesdays. He is Mr. Chase Oliver.
Yeah, I would like to call myself the Dante DiVincenzo of the Rated Raw Review. I come in when you guys need a good 3-point shot every once in a while. So yeah, big ragu in Minnesota. Love it.
Hey, you're the first Minnesota fan who says they love anything about this trade, but I give it to you. I said Dante DiVincenzo might wind up being the best pickup of this whole entire trade.
Yeah, and I like Randall. Him and Anthony Edwards are dogs. I want dogs on my team. No more cats. I want dogs.
He's a dog guy, not a cat guy. But we are guys that are going to be talking about the latest Netflix series, latest 6-part docu-series, if you will, on Vincent Kennedy McMahon, Mr. McMahon. It is in the top 10 most viewed shows over on Netflix for the past week. I believe it ranked number 3 in the U.S. for last week and number 4 overall worldwide. We're going to talk all about it. We appreciate y'all if you're joining us live. Appreciate y'all if you're watching us on demand. Remember to show your appreciation back the simplest way possible. Drop the thumbs up on this video. You can also share this video with all your wrestling fans, friends, and family on all your favorite social media platforms. If you're new to the True Hill Heat YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell to stay notified for all the great content here. And of course, sound off in the live chat. We love to interact with all of you guys and hear your thoughts on anything we're talking about, but especially this series here. We talked about it a little bit last week on the True Hill Heat flagship podcast, a lot of the fallout and the build up to the documentary, but this is going to be the standalone review of this 6-part series over on Netflix. So we want to hear from all of you, whether it be in the comments down below if you're watching us on demand or in the live chat. And if you're joining us live, remember to show your support to the True Hill Heat YouTube channel in the best way possible. You can send a super chat donation. Any dollar amount matters. It goes back to the contributors that you usually see on screen with us here. So we always appreciate that kind of support. But before we break everything down episode by episode and what exactly this man said, what is your overall thoughts on the Vince McMahon docuseries? Chase, I'll start with myself. I would say that this is a more useful docuseries for someone who isn't familiar with professional wrestling. And I know with Netflix, that's probably the aim that they were going for how this was done. Like, if you're a professional wrestling fan, you've probably heard all these stories from the same people that were on this docuseries with the numerous documentaries WWE have done throughout DVDs and WWE Network for the past 2 decades. You've probably heard all these stories, but this is more for someone who's not a wrestling fan. And by the end of it, I know they either learned something or were just like, how the hell did this man go nearly 4 or 5 decades in the position that he was in?
Yeah, I watched it with 2 different, I would say one semi-casual and one that doesn't even watch wrestling. So I watched it with my brother who used to watch wrestling, but he's not a wrestling historian like myself. So he was into this. Like, he was like, oh my God, this is really good. Like, he loved it. And then I watched it with my girlfriend, and she goes to events when I force her. She doesn't watch and stuff. Her favorite wrestler is Finn Balor because he looks good, guys. Like, there's no line of reasoning why she likes him. He doesn't do anything. But she absolutely loved this because she was like, oh my, I didn't know this guy was like this. Like, she knows about Vince from, honestly, the first time she ever heard about Vince was from the Janelle Grant stuff. So she doesn't really have too much knowledge about Vince McMahon. She because I remember the day she texted me, are you surprised by any of this? And I literally said, you would be shocked, but no, I'm not surprised that this came out about Vince. She goes, really? I'm like, he has done some stuff and whatnot. And Bill Simmons and David Shoemaker, they did do a follow-up podcast talking about this, where they said the aim was for, a casual viewing audience. I mean, Simmons, he's been working on this documentary, trying to get this documentary to be done since 2018, because after he did the successful Andre documentary, he called his shot. He said, I'm going to call my shot. I'm going to ask for a Vince documentary. I want to do this. Vince approached them, and then they started doing the documentary. This was actually supposed to be released in 2022, but then we know why it wasn't released in 2022. So it's been postponed for quite some time, this documentary. He even said, I don't even know if this was ever going to see the light of day. Like, he talked about it one day with cousin Sal on one of his football teams, because Sal said, when's that Vince documentary coming out? Like, back in 2022. I did my research, because I have a memory of a computer, not like Vince's computer that goes all over the place, but my computer.
Are you thinking about sex right now?
No, I think about useless shit half the time that doesn't matter. It's stuff that would never amount to anything in life. It's just stuff that sticks with me. So I wrote down, let me see if I can remember what they said in the episode. And Simmons literally said Netflix is cock blocking them on this project. And he's like, oh, maybe it's not the lawsuits or anything. And cousin Sal, he's always a hysterical guy on there. So, but yeah, this was obviously aimed towards, you don't know WWE. You know who Mr. McMahon is just because maybe you've heard his name or some point or other. But this wasn't targeted for us, SP3. We were sitting there probably I swear I've seen this Dark Side of the Ring episode. And they did give a shout out to Dark Side of the Ring, Bill Simmons and David Shoemaker. They said if they made the documentary for the sickle hardcore fans, it'd be totally different. But they had a goal of making it for casuals to watch, and it's working because still in the top 10. You wouldn't think it would be in the top 10 if it wasn't working. So people are still watching it.
Yeah, and that's what I said. That was the big takeaway that I got. Probably 2 episodes in, I was like, this is probably not for me. Yeah. And I was like, and then I got told by other people, I listened to a couple of reviews, and a lot of people said, you're not going to have a real opinion on this until you watch episode 6. So I was like, let me keep going. My missus, who, by the way, she's probably one of the only people close to this channel that has worked with Vince McMahon. She was done with this whole documentary before I even got to Screwjob. Before the 3rd episode, she was just like, this is not for me. I'm good. I already know he's a creep. So she tapped out after episode 2, and I was just like, that's fair. I got to keep watching this because I got to do reviews. I got to talk about it on the Flagship podcast. So I kept going, and episode 3, I was episode 3 was the main one where I was just like, good God, I've seen all these episodes. I've literally seen this. I've seen this from WWE. The Montreal, once they get to the Montreal Screwjob, that's probably the most covered moment in wrestling history that I think, like, anytime a documentary wants to talk about the Montreal Screwjob, I'm just, all right, I might type out. I might type out right here.
Where's the fast forward button?
I literally heard Vince talk about it. I heard Sean talk about it. I heard Triple H talk about it. I heard Brett talk about it at least a dozen times. I do not need this part to be this long. And I knew what it was all about when I see the episode title is Screwjob, and then they start off with the Wendy Richter angle, the first Screwjob, the original Screwjob, and I was like, I know how this is gonna end, even though you left off the last episode talking about the steroid trial. So why are we starting with this on this episode? I was like, But by the time we got to the end, you can tell that they had one direction for this, and then they had to flip the script because of everything that's happened since 2022.
Yes, 100%. Because Pritchard said it just felt like a hit piece. I was like, what hit piece? I didn't see no hit piece. This felt like, yeah, Vince is a terrible piece of shit, but look at the WWE. It's great. It's like I was like, I felt it was good for WWE. I mean, it didn't make WWE. That's the one thing this documentary did well. It did not slander WWE like that. It literally was like trying to put all the slander on mostly Vince McMahon than really like the company as a whole.
But you know, Bruce Pritchard and his reaction and his comments in episode 6 did let the company look bad, because we do all know that Bruce Pritchard is still hired by WWE.
Oh, yeah.
So despite their whole big campaign of getting rid of everybody that's associated to Vince McMahon or is a part of that regime or would want to defend Vince McMahon, they still have the number one kiss-ass Vince McMahon fan under employment, and in a very high position. Man, like I told everybody, I'll say it here, like I said it on the flagship. Cody Rhodes winning the undisputed WWE championship is one of the best moments of 2024. It's one of the best endings of WrestleMania that I ever seen.
Not for me.
And then he ruined it by bringing out Bruce Pritchard.
It wasn't for me, SP3. I was sad. It was the saddest thing in wrestling history.
I know it wasn't for you, but I'm just saying it was good for a majority of the fans. For me, he ruined it when he said, "Let's bring out Bruce Pritchard," and I'm just like, You sure you want to do that? I understand this. The whole point of this weekend is not to put over Cody. It was to put over Triple H in the Triple H era. So I'm fine with you bringing out Triple H at the end. But to bring out Bruce Pritchard, I was just like, what are you thinking, bro?
He wasn't, bro. When does Cody really think? Like, let's just be honest.
Good God. But yes, we got a couple of people in the chat with us, joining us already. We appreciate y'all for watching us live here. We got Aubrey James, who says, we have told lies about Cody's story. Dusty was chosen to be the face that runs the place. Yes, that was a cool, interesting part of the first episode, is hearing Vince's thinking and his line of thinking on who he was going to choose. I think that's one moment in like the first 2 episodes that was like new information.
Did you know Gorilla Monsoon was going to buy WWF? I didn't know that. Yeah. I didn't know that. I was like, that was the one thing I did not know. I was like, what? He was going to. I don't know if you've heard me say this on the show, but I will say it here again. My missus is the niece of Gorilla Monsoon. So I knew that. I knew. So as soon as they brought up that point, I looked over to her and I was like, man, you could have been a part of WWE management right now. Yeah, SP3, you could have had a pen. We would have. I mean, they already steal your storylines. It doesn't matter. They steal all our storylines, but it doesn't matter. They watch.
And they don't pay me shit. They don't pay me shit for that.
WWE, AEW, you guys have money. Cut us our checks. That's all we ask. We're not asking for much.
Exactly. Just come in and check. I'm just looking for a minimum wage. Minimum wage you can send me. I do enough job. Y'all can just send me minimum wage. Did I hear the Jim Cornette's response to Pat Patterson nasty work? I don't hear Jim Cornette on anything, and I don't want to be honest, Aubrey James.
Yeah, we got listening to Cornette. He's on the ban list.
Yeah. Especially how much he was dragging this whole AEW TV deal. It's not a good week to bring up anything that Jim Cornette says.
Yeah.
I'm a beat says, sup guys. I managed to squeeze all 6 hours in somehow. What a wild ride indeed. Indeed. He also says episode 4 was the best one, but that's just for nostalgia. I don't think so, because I felt, I think episode 4, the title was Attitude. I don't think they spend as much time on the Attitude Era that they should have.
I thought it was a WCW episode. They spent more time on WCW. They should have called it competition or something. I was all like, damn, what the fuck? Like Eric Bischoff getting all this runtime. 83, 83, 83, 83, 83. I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude, who cares? Get over yourself. Oh, I beat WWF for 83 weeks. Yeah, with their stars. Shut up. And I'm a WCW kid, and I'm saying that. Like, just shut up.
Love it. Love it. So let's start off with episode 1, which was Junior. We start off the episode with Vince McMahon sitting down in a ring, ready to be interviewed. We also see various talking heads that's going to be a part of this. Cody Rhodes, The Rock, Steve Austin, Shane McMahon, Trish Stratus. Beginning in 2021, as the credit says, this is over 100 hours of interviews were filmed with Vince McMahon, his family, business associates, and some of World Wrestling Entertainment's most popular stars. Vince says that he is good, I guess. He doesn't like talking about himself, and this is strange for him. I would try to do the best I can, he says. We hear various off-screen voices saying Vince is the P.T. Barnum of wrestling. Vince says nobody really knows him, and he still doesn't quite figured it out himself who he is. Hulk Hogan says he isn't sure if anyone knows the real Vince McMahon. Stephanie McMahon says people know who Vince is, but don't know who he is. Triple H says that Vince will show people what he wants them to see. Dave Meltzer says that very few people are in control of a world, and Vince McMahon was, keyword was. Eric Bischoff notes, Vince did things people thought were impossible and never took prisoners. Bret Hart says that he loves Vince, but he was a guy that lied to him and let him down with his lies. I love Bret Hart. Just is one of the more odd people on this. Shane McMahon says his dad gets the rap that he wants. And then we see Vince get up from his chair in the ring, and it says, before a final interview with Vince McMahon, breaking news halted production. And here we go. We get footage from ESPN's Get Up, where they break the news that Vince McMahon stepped down and allegations he paid off a former employee who he had an affair with. We meet Ted Mann, who is a reporter from Wall Street Journal, and he says that it all started with a tip that McMahon took advantage of a former employee. He was told that the tip was only scratching the surface. Joe Palazzo, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, says the story in June 2022 kicked off a series of events that led to other NDA and government investigations. Vince stepped down, Vince returning, Vince selling the company, and the lawsuit with all the graphic things Vince has been accused that led to Vince resigning for a second time in January 28th, 2024, and that would be the Janelle Grant lawsuit. It says that the majority of the following interviews, including with Vince McMahon, were filmed before the sex misconduct allegations were made public. And Vince says that he wishes he could tell us the real stories because, holy shit, he will give us enough so that it is semi-interesting. I don't want anyone to really know me. That one line right there, I was just like, so what was the point? Yeah. What was the point of talking to you?
Vince is very protective of himself, and you can see why with some of the stuff he did let loose when he did let people know who he was.
Yep. And then my big question to you that we're gonna have to answer by the end of this is, where do you think the line is between Vince McMahon and Mr. McMahon, the character?
Oh, okay. I'll think about that. I'll think about that near the end for sure.
There you go. We hear from Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, who says that you have to live to comprehend what is going to be said. You're not going to get it. Tony Atlas, who, by the way, was one of the MVP, spoiler alert, of this whole show. He explains wrestling as fantasy into reality. We get highlights of WWE moments from the 80s until now. Bret Hart says that people can call it fake. They are wrong, as he sees what he did as an art form. When they are there in the building, they want to believe it is real. Triple H notes that wrestling fans are viewed as stupid because they don't realize it's not real. But he says they are smart enough to know it is a show and buy into the characters and the stories. Bob Costas is here, and it's like that was a great addition, Bob Costas. He has
One
so
of
much
Vince's
history.
ops.
They had a few Vince ops on this
Yeah.
show. This is great. Bob Costas says that it is a colorful soap opera with heroes and villains. Sharon Mazer, who is an author, says pro wrestling matters and is part of the American culture. Nobody talks about it as mattering. She feels Vince's impact is largely ignored, yet it does affect the world around us. We cut to 1985 when NBC did a story on Vince McMahon and the WWF, and we see young Vince. He says that he got his start in the business because of his dad. Paul Heyman first met Vince Sr. in Madison Square Garden when he was just 15 years old. He presented himself as the Pope of Madison Square Garden. Vince didn't know his dad until he was 12 years old, as he grew up in a trailer park in North Carolina with his mom, an abusive stepdad. He never heard a word from his dad while all that abuse was happening, and he saw his dad for the first time, and he had a glow around him, he says. He ran up expecting a hug from his father, and all he got was a pat on the back. He was like, that was different. He admits that he fell in love with his dad quickly, and he says, I am so proud to say that my sons and I say we love each other multiple times a day. They need to know their father loves them. Vince says that they never had the conversation about why his dad was never in his life those first 12 years. And this was just a kind of a portrait of just why Vince is the way he is. He still has daddy issues.
Yep.
And he's not even willing to really like talk about it in full, because he starts off the story when he was 12 years old, but he remembers stuff from before 12 years old, but he's not willing to talk about it at all during this whole documentary.
Yeah, like when you say this is to take us behind the life of Vince McMahon, Steve and I even said this. We want to know more as Vince as a kid, like why Vince ended up like this. What did his stepdad do to him that made him so traumatized and stuff? And therapy back then was not as available as it is now. So he grew up. He's definitely grew up from the product of his time, where he is, still someone with daddy issues, just has a fucked up, tormented mind, and he never learned how to harness those feelings because he was too busy trying to make WWF at the time the most successful wrestling company, and he was dealing with other fucked up individuals. So yeah, I was very disappointed that we didn't go more into Vince's childhood. I want to know what were the days like in the trailer. Like I want to know that's what I felt was super important, so that way people can understand Vince's trauma a little bit more. It doesn't excuse anything he did, but at least it paints a picture of his trauma, like why he has this type of trauma and why maybe he's so sporadic as he is.
Yeah, this was really just about, him and his relationship with his father. What was his relationship like with his mother? And, we got touched on that with him, like saying that there's rumors been that, his mother even sexually abused him and stuff like that. So we only know like the rumors. We don't know anything from the source himself. And I wish that, he would have been more open to it, more than even just like the directors and the producers asking about it, because I'm sure they asked him about it, but he's not going to be open about it because, like I said, he started off this whole thing saying that he doesn't want us to know the real truth.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was Vince's kind of description of him and his father. David Shoemaker, one of the minds behind this whole documentary, says that Vince came from nothing, but when he saw his dad, he had something to aspire to, and that was his way out. Vince says that he didn't watch much wrestling until he met his dad. He immediately fell in love with the business, and he and his dad talked about business as that is how they had their connection with each other. Linda McMahon says that she met Vince when she was 13 and Vince was 16. They are some cool photos of them together when they were younger. Linda says that Vince always wanted to be in the business. Vince bothered his dad enough that he sent him to work in Bangor, Maine, which was the northernmost part of his territory. Vince says that he made Bangor a success, so Senior was impressed. They had TV, and the announcer wanted more money, so Vince Senior told Vince that he was the announcer now. We get some audio of young Vince on a 1970s show from Hamburg, Pennsylvania, as he asks his dad if this is quick enough. Bruce Pritchard says that Vince was a horrible commentator. I totally agree there.
What a maneuver!
What a maneuver! But he had emotion and told stories. Vince realized that he had to explain to the audience the story happening in the ring and compares the business to a movie, book, or play. You need interesting characters, both bad and good. Vince breaks down the meaning of heel and babyface and how there is always a big finish. The formula is simple, but not that easy to do. That was perfectly said. I will give him credit.
Yes.
Credit's due. We even see Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno Sammartino and Vince's call for that. Good stuff there. Vince Sr. wanted out of the business and wanted to sell to someone. Gorilla Monsoon was his first choice, as he was a partner already in one of the people that helped Vince Sr. with WWF. They showed the famous Monsoon versus Muhammad Ali bout from 1976. And Vince says that Gorilla was the heir apparent and he could feel the tension right away. Vince made a deal with his dad and offered to pay for the company in payments, and if he missed one, Senior would get to keep the money and get the business back. That appealed to Senior and the stockholders because nobody thought Vince would make it. Linda says they took over the company and were robbing Peter to pay Paul. He was able to make all the payments on time, and it shocked everyone. Vince says that Senior didn't want to make it easy on Vince, as he wanted him to know what it was like to struggle. Senior now worked for Junior, and their visions of pro wrestling were totally different. Vince says, "I don't like the term pro wrestling." Oh, we know.
Oh, yeah.
As soon as he said that, I was like, huh, that makes sense. I don't like that term even today. He wanted to grow beyond pro wrestling. We get a history lesson of the territory system, and we see the map and how everything broke down with the NWA. Vince had the WWF, which was the Northeast Territory, and you didn't cross the imaginary lines, but once Vince had control, that's exactly what he did. He pissed off a lot of people, but Vince didn't care. Senior was very much against it and told Vince not to rock the boat. Other promoters started telling Senior that his son would end up in the bottom of the river, and Vince didn't care, as they didn't own anything, and he says, "I was competing with you." Put a pen in that. Put a pen in that. Just remember that. Eric Bischoff works for Vern Gagne with AWA, and he says Vern saw Vince as the devil. Put a pen in that as well. That won't be the last time you hear that. The top talent in various territories took the money and exposure for Vince's WWF. Bret Hart says that it was cutthroat, as Vince would steal the top talent in each place, and Bret would know because he was one of the top talents in Calgary who got stolen away. They show various wrestlers cutting promos in one territory and then show them in WWF right after. Vince says that he was not taking anything away from anyone. He was building, as this was America, and if you can't compete with him, tough. Put in that as well. He was successfully competing for a bid and decided he wanted to do things his way. His father had Bob Backlund as his champion, and Bob was too kind of like bland for Vince's liking. He was looking for someone with more charisma. And we see Dusty Rhodes. Vince says that he was a possibility. We are treated to a little snippet of Dusty's promos, and Cody Rhodes says that he was told by Dusty's his father that he didn't believe in what Vince was doing, and it seemed too large of an endeavor. Vince says that Dusty didn't take advantage, so he kept looking for someone that was larger than life. And then we see Hulk Hogan on the screen. Vince says he first met Hulk Hogan when he was Sterling Gold. I did not know that was his original. I never looked that up. That popped me. Sterling Gold. Did you know his name was originally Sterling Gold?
I remember like he was like Terry something back in like the old days.
Yeah.
I did not know Sterling Gold. Like that is news to me too. Sterling, what made him think of that? Like, oh my
Sterling
God.
Golden. Yeah.
Oh, that's horrible. Come on, Hulkster.
He said he was working for Senior, who gave him the Hulk Hogan name change as he didn't like Sterling Golden, and that gives the world Hulk Hogan. We get Hogan saying that he was brought in because he looked believable going against Andre the Giant. We see Hogan slamming Andre years before WrestleMania 3. Put a pin in that because that's part of the lies that WrestleMania 3 was. WrestleMania 3 might be the biggest lie of an event we've ever seen.
Hogan was on his A game of lying because I kept notes of all the Hulk Hogan lies before this documentary. And Hogan loves revisionist. This guy probably has the best revisionist history of all time. He changes every fucking story. It's like the craziest thing how much he changes.
And he exposed himself on one of his lies that he's told for many years in this documentary.
Yeah.
Hogan mentioned Shea Stadium was sold out with him and Andre. That's a big event that happened before the WrestleMania era. Hogan gets an offer for Rocky 3, but Senior tells Hogan that he was a wrestler and didn't do that stuff. He tells Hogan that if he does the movie, he will be fired, and Hogan does the movie. It was one of the smartest moves he's ever made, he says. We get the footage of him in Rocky 3. Vern Gagne called up Hogan and asked him how quick he can get to Minnesota. Hogan was now a massive babyface as the fans were quickly getting behind him, and all Vince could see was dollar signs. So he basically pays Hogan to leave the AWA and come on over to Vince and WWF. He got the title off of Bob Backlund using Iron Sheik, and he gets Hogan in, and Hogan, he's making him a part of the Americana. And he wants him to face the foreign heel. So Pritchard says that it doesn't, he says that kind of stuff doesn't age well, but you can say the same about movies with the way they portray Germans, Japanese, and Russians. Basically, it was a time we hated everyone that wasn't American. Very true. Yep. Vince says you can't take the values of today and look back and apply them to what happened. He didn't think of what they did back then as a big deal. Sheik beats Bob Backlund at Madison Square Garden, and a month later, everything changes. Hulk Hogan arrives with Eye of the Tiger. Great stuff. Hogan says Vince chose the winners and the losers, but Hogan called the match in the ring when he first ironed Sheik. He admits to jumping Sheik before the matchup and didn't tell him he was going to do it. He was just feeling it and going with the crowd. Hogan hits the big leg and history is made. Meltzer says if you take Hulk Hogan out of the equation, I think Vince falls in his expansion. He credits Vince as being better at making stars than all the other people in the business at that time. Vince says that his dad told him that he was proud of him for beating all the promoters. Those friends he had weren't really his friends, so fuck him. Vince says that was one of the biggest moments of his life. Vincent James McMahon dies at 69, and Vince says the day before his dad told him that he loved him for the first time. That is so sad. If I could have any sympathy for this man, it would be in this moment where he said his dad didn't tell him he loved him until he was about to die.
Yeah, that I could not imagine. My dad's a piece of shit, but he at least told me he loved me when I was a kid. So,
oh my God, he said he gets a little emotional, kind of talking about it, and says he really cared about his dad and loved his dad. Tony Atlas says, I don't really think he liked his father, to be honest with you. Tony says every idea Vince had drove his father up the roof and drove the wrestlers up the roof. Heyman says that Vince Sr. had a lack of willingness to accept where the industry was heading. And Tony says that it was not wrestling. Vince wanted to cater to a younger audience and didn't care if people knew it was scripted. Vince wanted national, and that gets him up on USA Network. Tony says Vince was never in the wrestling business, only the entertainment business. That brings up TNT Tuesday Night Titans with Vince as the host. Tony thinks Vince wanted to use wrestling as a stepping stone to other stuff. We see Vince on the David Letterman show, on the anniversary show with Bob Costic. Vince was really good. He was playing it really well. You could tell that he would have a future as a TV character.
Oh yeah,
from this stuff here. What did you think about that? And
Yeah,
did you know about it before?
yeah. I learned about that. You know, my dad and my mom, they would tell. My mom used to be a huge wrestling fan. Now she's kind of like, she'll watch it like every so often and stuff if like a name she likes is wrestling. But yeah, no, they told me about this, that Vince used to do like sometimes he'd do like TV show spots and stuff. But yeah, no, Vince, yeah, honestly, that if this didn't work out for him, he would have been a killer, like what Bob Costas is. He would have been like what Bob Costas was. He would have probably found a career in that and somehow try to make that into a monopoly as well. He would have been like, oh, we're gonna be like the sportscasters and stuff. Maybe he forms ESPN himself. Maybe Vince McMahon forms his own sports network. Who knows?
We'll never know. We'll never know. Then it moves into the Rock and wrestling connection. Vince sees MTV as a big place for him to make his stars. He gets the connection to Cyndi Lauper, who's a massive pop star, and met Captain Lou Albano on a plane. They were able to pull Cyndi into the WWE family, and that brought MTV with it. They did 2 shows on MTV, and Vince used Cyndi to help get more attention on the women's division. We even got Wendy Richter here. She got a call out of the blue from Lauper asking if she could be with her at ringside, and she credits her success with the fans to Lauper. The biggest feud at the time was Roddy Piper versus Hulk Hogan, and that brought in Mr. T. And with Mr. T involved, with Cyndi Lauper involved, Vince was having every second of running, the business and his expansion. But Linda convinces him that he needed a vacation. So they go to the Caribbean for 2 days, and then when he comes back, he announces they're going to run a major show every year like the NFL has with the Super Bowl, and it's going to be called WrestleMania. Linda realizes that Vince didn't enjoy any second of the vacation and was only thinking about business.
Like most successful rich people are, like they are never they're never off. Like I interned for Zuffa for like a summer, which is owned by the UFC, and I would know this because like Dana White would go on vacation, and then all of a sudden he would be calling the Zuffa office pretty much almost every day. And I'm like, isn't this motherfucker supposed to be on vacation? Like, why is he calling all the time? So he was not on vacation. He was thinking of ways and ideas of like to help UFC at that time, which was doing well. I mean, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, I think he could have chilled, but no, he was going.
So it breaks down how they were promoting WrestleMania. We see Mr. T, Hogan on Saturday Night Live. And then we see John Stossel. Part of the media blitz involved him working for ABC 2020. Hogan notes that he was told that Stossel was there to see if Hogan was as popular as everyone claimed. But he asks him if wrestlers cut their heads with blades. Hogan told him that was barbaric and laughs as he had scars on his damn head and he's hiding it with the bandana. Hogan ran to Vince McMahon. Put a pin in that because that won't be the last time.
No, he loves running to Vince.
He told him that Stossel was looking to expose the business. Tony Atlas says that Vince told the boys Stossel was going around telling people wrestling was fake and how he wished someone would do something to that guy. Hogan says he never heard Vince say that he wanted someone to put John in his place. And Tony Atlas says he didn't tell us. He said, I wish.
I loved Atlas's use in this. Anytime there was like something that like Atlas and Brett, especially, anytime there was like a like something that was like kind of blurry, Atlas and Brett were just all like, yeah, no, especially Tony Atlas. He would like anything you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that person wasn't the bad. Yeah, no, Vince said. And then it's just like, God damn, Atlas just exposed it. And you could tell Tony Atlas, a lot of people were like walking on eggshells. Jimmy Hart, I don't know how
Yeah.
much they want out there. I don't know. Like I love that they left that and made that guy look like an idiot. And then Tony Atlas, I don't know what they paid him. I don't know if he just said, I really don't give a fuck. He did not give a fuck. He was just there to just be his authentic self. And I thank Tony Atlas for that, because that's what this documentary needed. Not Hogan. Well, I don't remember, brother, what Vince said back there. You know. Come on, brother.
Exactly.
Don't lie to us.
Exactly. You don't bullshit us. So that leads to the slap heard round the world. If you've seen Dark Side of the Ring, we did a review on that episode with David Schultz, who's interviewed by Stossel, and he smacks him over, smacks the piss out of his mouth. Atlas says everyone, including Vince, celebrated. David was getting pats on the back and people were buying him drinks. Hogan says that they were protective of the business and wrestling is not fake. Predetermined, but not fake, as he notes that he had 23 surgeries in the last 20 years. So if it was fake, he didn't get the memo. Stossel sues WWF and is getting attention that they want. That leads to Hogan. He is also doing the media run, and he goes on Richard Belzer's talk show, and Richard Belzer's talking shit to him, and Belzer gets choked out and cracks his head on the floor as he ends up suing Hogan and the WWF. He says Vince was pissed at that. Meltzer says that Vince has told the story that if Mania failed, they would be in financial ruins, and that was possibly true. Stephanie McMahon says that Vince and Linda mortgaged everything they own. Shane says that he was a teenager and didn't know the family finances. Vince just kept telling Shane that it was going to work. And work it did. It's a grand slam. It's a great hit for WWF. Everything explodes after WrestleMania, and it's a big success. But all that success brought eyes to Vince and his product, and the bad press and scandals were on the way, not just these lawsuits and everything. And then at the end of episode 1, Junior, it says in 1987, John Stossel settled his lawsuit against David Schultz and Titan Sports. David Schultz was, of course, fired from WWE following this. And in 1990, Richard Belzer settled his lawsuit against this man, Hulk Hogan and Titan Sports. But I love how all of this was always, they settled it. They settled that. They settled that lawsuit. They settled this lawsuit. It always ended like that the first couple of episodes here. But any final thoughts on episode 1, Junior?
It was solid. It was a good start. Like I feel bad for Howard Finkel. Not even a reference that he thought of the name of WrestleMania. They don't give the Fink anything. No. They're just like, nope. Vince was in the crib and he thought of WrestleMania. It was all him. I understand why the wrestlers were so protective of the business in the 80s. And nowadays people know wrestling is a predetermined sport. It's just entertainment. Like Triple H summed it up best in episode 1. We're not dumb because we watch wrestling. We're invested in the characters. We're invested in the stories. I always told people, when people say, why you watch wrestling? I'm like, it's like a male soap opera for me. Like, I just enjoy.
I always say it's a play on steroids.
Play on that. That's great. I'm going to use that from now on. I like that. But for me, I always said it's a male soap opera. I enjoy the corniness and the aspect of professional wrestling. I think the crowds also help with it. Like, just seeing, I don't know how a bunch of people can just like look at one guy like Jey Uso and just be like, I love this guy. I'm like, it still boggles my mind to this day for a lot of things. So yeah, no, I understand why they're protecting the business, but also that one guy, the host, you're so stupid. I don't care if you think wrestling's fake. What makes you think, I want to challenge Hulk Hogan? Hulk Hogan's a big individual on steroids at this time. Why would you ask him to choke you? That makes no sense. Like, I do not care. Like, and especially nowadays, because most of these wrestlers do like some sort of training outside of being a pro wrestler. Why would you ever want to fuck with a wrestler like that? You stupid. So I was fine with that. But yeah, maybe David Schultz should have slapped that reporter like that. Like, hey man, do it for the business and stuff. But that probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, especially if WrestleMania is right around the corner, brother. Come on.
Yeah, not the best decision, but David Schultz is a real one, though.
Yeah.
Shout out to David.
Protecting our industry. Thank you.
So episode 2 is called Heat, and this would go into more of like the controversies that sparked up during their boom period in the 80s. Dave Meltzer says, well, we start off the episode with Vince McMahon singing, stand back, stand back, stand back, stand back, stand back. And Dave Meltzer says that 84 and 85 were pivotal in wrestling history as everything was changing. That leads to the birth of Saturday night's main event. Vince partners up with NBC. He notes that it was a really big deal, and he isn't lying. For people my age, that was kind of, or people even older than us, this was like the big thing that happened with wrestling when it went on national TV. They are on network television for the first time. With the business booming, more shows were needed, and soon wrestlers were working 7 nights a week. Jimmy Hart notes that it was a hard grind, and Brett wanted just a few more days off a year. They were working like 365, basically. Meltzer says that they could have managed the schedule better, and especially in the late 80s when it was a disaster. He continues that the schedule now isn't that bad, and the wrestlers all are on guaranteed contracts. They don't have the pressure to work hurt. In the 80s, they had to work to make the money, and painkillers were needed. Bob Costas brings up the wrestlers were exploited as they had no union. Brett says that they needed a union, and that's what Jesse Ventura was trying to do. But of course, who was it that stopped them?
When it comes crashing down, it hurts
inside. Hulk Hogan says Jesse was trying to start a union before WrestleMania 2 and admits that he was Team Vince. He told him Jesse was stirring shit up. Brett says that Hogan ratted him out, and Atlas and Meltzer jump on that train as well. Vince says that the whole thing was a sham and nobody in the locker room would ever get behind Jesse, but they were. Atlas says that Vince met with every wrestler and told them they would be fired if they went with Jesse. Meltzer admits most of the wrestlers would never do it, and maybe some would walk out, but most would go back and undercut what Jesse was trying to do to get a better spot with Vince. And that's why even today there are no unions. And I was just like, Hulk Hogan, you lied about this for 40 years. And now you want to be honest? Now you want to admit that you were Team Vince?
Yep. On the Joe Rogan experience, Hulk Hogan was asked about, like, Rogan, he doesn't know wrestling, asked why there was no unions in pro wrestling. And Hogan said, well, they were trying to start one with Jesse the Body and da-da-da. And said, like, someone in the locker room tipped it off to Vince. Said someone in the locker room, not him, someone. So Hogan, I have a whole thing in front of me. So you're not safe. Oh, wait till we get to WrestleMania 3, brother. I am so pissed at everything that you said in this documentary about WrestleMania. My girlfriend was just like, why are you so annoyed right now? And I'm just like, this guy lying. Everything he's saying is a lie.
He always lies. And then he admits it, and you prove that you lied. So we get WrestleMania 2 with Vince's idea is to top the first WrestleMania. He wants to do 3 shows in 3 cities at one day. And Hogan says that was a disaster. Vince couldn't be in all 3 places, so it wasn't the spectacle like WrestleMania 1. And then here we go into WrestleMania 3. I knew immediately. I was like, Vince and Dave Meltzer are going to argue about this.
I know people shit on Uncle Dave. He was an MVP in this episode.
He was a fact checker. In this episode, he was the fact checker on this one. Vince knew that there was a massive stadium in Michigan and knew of a matchup that can fill it, Hogan versus Andre. He admits they had wrestled before, but their plan was to convince the new audience that it had never happened. I love you. We're going to lie to them. Never happened before. Vince's next task was convincing Andre to return to the business. He was filming Princess Bride. He had just done that movie and didn't want to return to wrestling. Vince went to meet Andre while he was filming the movie and pitched the idea of having back surgery and returning to face Hogan in front of 93,000 people. Andre laughed at first, and then Vince told him the plan was to make Andre the heel, and the world had never seen him like that. That's crazy that a giant had never been a heel in wrestling.
Yeah.
As long as Andre was wrestling, it wasn't until 1987 that they was like, you know what? You would be a good heel.
Yeah, that I think it was because Andre was such a attraction because he was so big. People just like were like, oh my god, look at this cool big guy. And honestly, we all know Andre was just a sweetheart. So like he was probably so great with the children. Like, how could you hate this guy? Like, yeah, I don't think. And also, it was territory, so you couldn't really book him as a villain. It was just kind of like, okay, here's Andre. He's here. We overpaid to get him. Now we don't have any money to pay anyone else.
Andre finally agrees and gets the operation. We see how the whole matchup was built up on Piper's Pit when Andre returns with Bobby the Brain Heenan as his manager. And he says, I am here for one reason, to challenge you, Hulk Hogan, for the World Championship match at WrestleMania. Piper says, are you not going to fight him at WrestleMania 3? Yes or no? And Hogan says, yes. all the money. Everybody just here's all our money. Vince says we sold 93,000 seats. The Silver Dome does look amazing with all those people packed in it. We see Aretha Franklin doing the America the Beautiful. We got Vince says Hogan and Andre were the ones that drew the house. Vince continues the story of how Andre would never let Hogan know he was going to win the match. Hogan went to Vince and Vince assured him things would be fine. Andre will do the right thing. Don't worry. And Hogan's like, what does that mean? I was like, Hogan, you've been trying to fool people about this for 40 years now. No one believes you. We know you and Andre talked about it.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, continue on. I have my rant for near the end. Like that's where it's coming because like I fucking hate everything about this episode with Hogan.
Hogan versus Andre. Hogan was amazed at the size of the crowd and figured that this would be the easiest thing he's ever did, or it would be a disaster. Hogan realized how bad Andre's back was and tried to keep him near the ropes. Andre yelled at him, slam, and it shocked Hogan. He says that he didn't know he was winning. Andre didn't kick out after the leg drop. Hogan has always put Andre over big for what he did for him that night. Vince says that was probably the greatest attraction we ever had. There you go for the crazy people over there that think, they inflated or overinflated the importance or significance of Andre and Hogan. It was big. It was, especially for where the business went. It is one of the biggest main events in wrestling history. Meltzer says that the story was Andre passing the torch, but he says that Hogan was already a bigger star than Andre heading into that.
Yeah.
It is true and worth mentioning. We get he says the attendance Meltzer then goes on to say they have said 93,000 so many times they probably believe it by now. There's our Dave Meltzer, and then it goes to. I love that it went to everybody over there. And Hogan doesn't say 93,000. He says the exact total: 93,173. Pritchard and Vince both mentioned 93,000 people, and then it just cuts back to Meltzer. He says it was actually 78,000 in the building.
David Shoemaker was trying to play peacemaker. He was all like, "Well, we don't really know how much the actual attendance was, but." It was still impressive at the time. It was just like, he was like kind of like, okay, I'll play peacemaker on it because Shoemaker has been on. He's on actually Team Meltzer on this because on his podcast he has been very on record. He believes Dave's numbers on the 73,000, but he can understand if WWE was counting like their roster, the people that were working that day, getting to the 93,000. And one of his co-hosts was like, "Do you really think they had 20,000 motherfuckers working that day?"
It was like, what's how many seats are there exactly in the building?
Yeah.
Okay, that's how many we got. Hogan says that Mania 3 changed the business and launched them into the superstar status. Tony Atlas says that Hogan may have been the most popular person in the world at one time. We see the cartoons as Costa says that Hogan had broken through to the mainstream. Stephanie says as a kid, she felt resentment that her dad never got the credit for creating all of it. And I think that he did, Stephanie.
Yeah.
This is like your whole speech after 9/11. When they attacked my father. Alex says that every word out of Hogan's mouth was what Vince wanted him to say. Hogan says the same because everything Vince came up with turned to gold. We get a workout set, and you could see Vince kind of telling Hogan what to say with the Hogan vitamins and everything. Hogan would be out doing the shows and drawing the money while Vince was in the office working around the clock to keep things moving. Hogan told Vince that he wanted to do movies, and Vince was worried that he would lose Hogan to Hollywood. So he pitches the idea of them making their own movie. He knew nothing about making a movie, but they write one together, and it's No Holds Barred. Oh my God. Hogan says they spent 2.5 days in a hotel room and didn't know what they were doing, but had fun. I don't believe you, Hogan. No Holds Barred. Pritchard says that it wasn't the worst movie, but it wasn't great. They showed the Dookie line.
My friend quotes that line too much. I fucking hate that line because of my friend.
What's that smell?
That's such a Vince line too. Like, Vince was laughing when he was writing that.
Vince says he thought that the movie would make all the money, and that didn't happen. Pritchard is asked when he felt Hogan had started to fade, and he mentions WrestleMania 6. They go over how they thought that the Ultimate Warrior would become the next star, so they do the passing of the torch. Hogan was still the biggest star and even had a bigger reaction than Warrior that night, but Vince says that Hogan's star may have been fading a little bit, so they wanted to put Hogan on the bench for a while. Hogan says Warrior was built better than him and had brighter colors. Hogan says the problem was Warrior didn't have the love for the business, but he did for Warrior what Andre did for him and passed the torch. The match is one of the best put together matches, I think, in WrestleMania history. For two guys that are not known as good workers, it might be the best layout for a matchup and execution outside of Macho Man and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
I mean, Hogan's still kicking out after the Warrior hits the splash. Still pisses me off to this day. But yeah, I love that. That's the match that got me into wrestling because my dad had WrestleMania 6 and 7 on VHS, and I would always watch it. And Ultimate Warrior, when I was getting into wrestling, was my favorite wrestler just because, like Hogan said, the bright colors. Why is this guy running to the ring? I didn't know any of this. I'm just like, dude. Oh my God. And I was in Warrior Savage is one of my favorite WrestleMania matches of all time. Like, I absolutely adore that match. I'll defend that match till I die. Like, I'll just be like, no, it's an instant classic for me. But yeah, no, Warrior made sense at the time. I mean, it's crazy. They didn't talk anything else about Warrior in this documentary.
No.
They left it at, oh yeah, he won the title.
He won the title, didn't love the business, and they moved the title off of him rather quickly.
I wonder if it's because they have an award for Warrior at the Hall of Fame. That's why I didn't talk about him.
Maybe.
And nothing. We didn't talk about him pulling out a gun on Vince or anything, right?
No.
Water under the bridge.
Maggie says, did I miss a classic SP3 rant, or is this entire stream a rant? Don't worry, Maggie. When we get to Rita Chatterton, you'll get your rant.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things to rant about.
You'll get your rant. And Maggie also says, no one can convince me No Holds Barred took more than 2.5 seconds to think of. Yes, that's what I said. I don't believe Hogan was in a room for 2.5 days to write that.
Yeah, weren't you working 7 days a week, Hulkster? How the hell did you have 2.5 days to write a movie? Lies.
The lies. Pritchard admits that Warrior wasn't as popular as Hogan, and he wasn't everything they wanted him to be, so they had to pivot and go back to Hogan. Their idea is to turn Sergeant Slaughter heel and make an Iraqi sympathizer. For Vince, it was a way to capitalize on what was happening in the world and got heat. Yeah, they got some heat, that's for sure. Vince says the story was working really well, and then the real world ruined things as Iraq invaded Kuwait. He says Americans were fighting overseas now, and people didn't want to see it being turned into a wrestling story. Hogan says Slaughter and his family were getting death threats, and he felt the whole thing was a risky move. Vince says that they backed off the story a little bit, but still had the match. No type of them being real about the fact that they got a stadium in Los Angeles and
LA
had to
Coliseum.
transition to a smaller building. Usually the whole story that they give us is, oh, because of the death threats, we had to move from the stadium to a smaller arena. But it's the fact that they weren't selling tickets for it.
Yeah, because they even said their reasoning was, oh, they got a letter from someone that was a U.S. sniper, and he was going to snipe Sergeant Slaughter on the way to the ring. So that's why they moved it to the small arena. But really, to be honest, it just wasn't selling at that time. And during that time, just being someone from California was not really a wrestling city. It's not a wrestling. It wasn't. It still probably isn't a wrestling city, but it's a destination city. But back then, like California was Hollywood, all this other stuff. It wasn't like a tour. It was kind of a tourist attraction, but wasn't really a tourist attraction. Plus, we had way more gang wars at that time and stuff. So I don't expect someone from Connecticut being like, "Oh, I'm going to take a trip to Los Angeles, California for this." Like that's not how California was in the early 90s. Like it was a dangerous place to be. Earthquakes were like a big deal for a lot of people. They didn't know how to handle. Hell, the earthquake just happened as I was doing this during this show. So that's just how it works around here. We just get earthquakes. It's just like we just feel the earth shake. We're like, oh, that's normal and stuff. So yeah, California is not a good wrestling city at all. And so that's why it failed. And it's like you're trying to revision this. You're not even mentioning the fact that I was kind of disappointed, but I was hoping Uncle Dave would have popped in, like, well, actually, I was waiting for Dave to dunk on him again. I'm like, all right, Uncle Dave, cut to Uncle Dave, saying, well, that's not really the thing that actually happened. What actually happened was they couldn't sell
I feel like that's the big missing part from this episode, and then the big missing part from the first episode is they never even mentioned Black Saturday.
Yeah.
So there was some missed opportunities here, but I understand you got so much information in both of these episodes, so you had to cut on some stuff. So they talk about the audience getting sick of Hulk Hogan as the American hero, and then the whisper started about a doctor prescribing steroids to wrestlers. Yes, Dr. George Zarian. Vince says that he was appointed by the PA State Athletic Committee Commission to cover WWF shows. They had no voice in who was appointed. He was in the locker room with the boys and started selling steroids to them. Hogan says that it became part of the norm as everyone in sports in Hollywood were taking them to become larger than life. Bret Hart says that Doctor would check everyone before the matchup and then ask what they needed. Vince says that it was not illegal to sell steroids. It says he bought some. But it was illegal to prescribe them and then sell them. Pritchard mentions they were legal and it became illegal if not used for the intended purpose as the class 3 substance when Reagan started his crackdown on drugs, and Zarian was arrested, and it became a bad time for Vince McMahon and the World Bodybuilding Federation. Vince says that it was not a good time as all the bodybuilders did take steroids and he was getting all kind of heat. Zarian testified he treated Hogan for a serious steroids abuse problem. Vince was pressured into steroids testing and he went on the air saying that the WWF would be drug-free. He admitted to taking steroids at one time and promised WWF would be the standard for drug-free and drug testing. And then we go to Hulk Hogan on a City Hall show. Vince told Hogan to come clean, but Hogan denied it and said he only took steroids 3 times. Everyone came out the woodwork to shoot down Hogan's claim. We get Billy Graham saying Hulk Hogan took steroids. David Schultz says, I shot him up with steroids personally myself. Hogan admits to self-destructing himself and he should have listened to Vince. And Vince says, you need to tell the truth and just take what comes with it. That's some good advice, Vince.
The pot calling kettle black here.
Then we get the biggest Vince op of them all, Phil Mushnick. For the New York Post, Richard wants to be nice, but says that there is nothing nice to say about him. Vince says Phil was digging for everything he could and has a vendetta to this day against him and wrestling. I don't know why, because he is Phil says, because he's a dirtbag. Meltzer said Phil is the one guy that wrote strongly against Vince, stronger than I would write. Phil says that he started writing his stories and he received letters that he didn't know half of it. He returned calls and it was mind-blowing what he was hearing. Shoemaker says pulling back the curtain on pro wrestling would be shocking to people. And Tony Atlas says that they would come off as some of the worst human beings on the face of the earth. He admits they abused the hell out of women as they were toys to them. Jimmy Snuka is brought up, and I was like, let's go. Let's get into it. They talk about him killing his girlfriend in a hotel. She hit her head and died, and the person who investigated it called it a homicide, but no charges were filed. And people think to this day Vince had a hand in getting Snuka out of trouble. I do after watching Dark Side of the Ring.
Even before Dark Side of the Ring, I knew Snuka did it. Like I was just like, "There's no way."
No,
like,
but I knew Snuka did it, but I now believe that Vince is the reason why he got away with it.
Oh yeah, 100%, dude. You're telling me Vince at that time in the '80s was like a millionaire, and that's like you're considered like a billionaire at that time, and there's no way that Vince couldn't have been like, "Here's some hush money. Don't say anything about this. This guy's kind of my biggest act. I don't want this guy to." I mean, come on, Snuka not wrestling at WrestleMania 1? I don't know. It's kind of odd. Biggest star not wrestling at WrestleMania 1.
Yeah. They go into the ring boy scandal, and Mel Phillips would bring underage ring boys to the show, and they would be sexually harassed. Brett says that Mel Brooks was a total pedophile who wouldn't hire ring crew unless they would do sexual favors. Phil learned that it involved Terry Garvin, an executive in Connecticut, and Pat Patterson. Pritchard says the business was homophobic and Pat was openly gay, but he became a top guy everywhere he went. News footage of Tom Cole saying that Pat Patterson would pat him on the butt and grab his testicles. Garvin offered him cocaine and propositioned him as well. Phil says that at best, Vince was guilty of a ranking negligence. Vince says that Phil didn't care who he hurt on either side, and Phil said that there were real kids being abused on Vince's watch. Brett thinks something may have happened, but doesn't know how you can prove it. Vince settled, and Mel Phillips, and Garvin were let go. Meltzer says that Pat Patterson resigned, but he had a conversation with Vince, and he told Dave that one of the three were innocent, and that was Pat. Dave asked why he resigned then, and Vince said the business was all about gay witch hunts, so Pat had to leave. Dave notes that most people in wrestling who were around believe Pat never acted unprofessionally, and Pritchard says that he doesn't believe the allegations against Pat, but the others, no comment. And then we get to Tony Atlas. Tony Atlas says they all knew Pat was doing this stuff. And then he says, I mean, I was in the locker room one time and Pat Patterson grabbed my pickup. I'm sorry. This is serious, but the way he delivered this line was one of the funniest moments of this whole documentary. They like, Pat Patterson touched my pickup.
Did you file a complaint to anyone? To who?
To who? He's the booker and the number 2 in the company. The producer shoots back Vince, and Atlas nearly chokes laughing. He's like, he needed Pat more than he needed me. Dave says that was Vince's right-hand man in the company and calls him a savant. And Atlas doesn't think Vince protected Pat, but was protecting the business. The reaction from legit media was dismissive, and the only ones that jumped on the scandals were shows like Donahue. Vince says that he was one of the few people who enjoys confrontation, so he went on the show. And Dave Meltzer said he was sitting next to Vince, and Vince said that was the longest hour of his life. Pritchard knows Vince was getting frustrated as this was something he couldn't control. And the biggest thing for Vince is he's a known control freak. Jimmy Hart is asked about the various backstage relationships, but he wants to be cautious and doesn't know what they want to have out in the open. You already gave too much away. Brett says gives no fucks though and brings up Rita Chatterton, Rita Marie. Vince says that he was accused of alleged rape that never happened. Rita goes on Gernaldo and details what Vince did to her, and it sounds like what we have heard with the current situation. Vince claims that it was consensual, so he's admitting adultery, to be fair, and then he makes it worse. He says, once you are accused of rape, you are a rapist. He said, even if it was rape, the statute of limitations have run out. I was like, yo, if I'm your lawyer, I am calling you up immediately after seeing this shit.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Like, why would you even add that? Why would you even say that?
I'm using this clip in the court for the Janelle Grant case. If I'm Janelle Grant's lawyer, this clip is one of the first things I'm asking. Can I use this as evidence? Because it's very, very incriminating on Vince McMahon when he said that. I've worked with lawyers. I've worked with the lawyer that's working with Janelle Grant. I've edited videos for her. Like, trust me, I'll probably be whipping this up. I'll probably be whipping up the evidence file case for her if she contacts me and if the pay is right. You know, I'm like Hogan, brother. Yeah. You gotta pay me correctly.
The public, Phil says the public didn't want to know, and the major papers ran away from it. They just saw it as wrestling. More trouble as the federal government comes for Vince about steroids. Phil admits that he was an FBI informant. Oh shit, he I was like, informant. Oh shit, Vince is screwed. He said they didn't look into the Ring Boy or Rita scandals, but Vince pleads not guilty to steroids distribution. The federal government could be the biggest bully, says Vince. They have unlimited resources. He says, go fuck yourself, as he wasn't guilty of anything. Vince gets neck surgery, and Dave doesn't think that it was a needed surgery. It was just Vince getting some sympathy. Hogan brings up that fans started to turn on him and he didn't feel like he was in control of the crowds anymore. So after WrestleMania 8, he had his final match. Brett says people don't understand how dire the situation was and it was the perfect time for competition to pounce. And then you see Ted Turner, one of the pioneers of cable television and was the first to broadcast pro wrestling nationwide. Eric Bischoff was his number 2 at the time, and Eric says that before he was hired, the WCW was doing a cheap version of what WWF did, and following the steroid trial, he was aware that Hulk Hogan had left the WWF, so we kind of jump forward like a year where he talks about approaching Hulk Hogan when he was filming Thunder in Paradise, and he convinced him to come to WCW. And then Hogan says that he told Vince he would never run against him, but Vince gave him his release and he believed Hogan, and then he popped up in WCW. Vince says that it broke his heart. Shane calls it a slap in the face and views it as such even to this day. Pritchard says Hogan was offered a better deal, and there was also the trial hanging over WWF. And then the government wanted Hogan to be their star witness and was told if he didn't go along, they would turn their attention on him. So what the fuck did they have on you, Hulk Hogan? That's my question.
They had enough where Hogan was able to lie to them so that way he could be pardoned. Because that was the main thing Hogan was looking for. He would have gone to jail for a long time. A long time. Vince most likely would have been free from everything, no matter what Hogan would have said. I think Vince still would have been found not guilty and would have turned into the trial of Vince McMahon and the steroid trial to the trial of Hulk Hogan. And Hulk Hogan would have probably been in jail for 6, maybe 13 years. And that's a long time for someone. And really, to be honest, that would have hurt WWF more than Vince McMahon going to jail because that was the guy in WWF. That is the guy. And he now goes to jail 6, 13 years. Vince makes this claim, oh, we're going to be the cleanest. Well, one of your top acts of all time is in jail for 6, 13 years because of the steroid thing. So Hogan, his lies are horrible, but it came in handy when he needed it the most.
He lied on a court of law. Well, so yeah, the episode ends with Hogan about to go on the trial to confess. And then the episode ends in 1994. Vince McMahon withdrew his defamation lawsuit against Rita Chatterton and Geraldo Rivera. And in 2023, during a temporary lift of statute of limitations of alleged victims of sexual offense in New York State, Hogan paid a multi-million dollar settlement to Rita Chatterton. But he continues to deny any wrongdoing to this day.
Yeah, you don't pay millions of dollars to someone when you know you've done something wrong. Vince,
Exactly, Vince.
Vince totally abused that woman, which is really sad to say, but he did. He did. It's quite obvious when you pay that much. Like, dude. I think that's the last two episodes we're gonna go into like great detail on, because a lot of this next episode, the screw job episode, I said it before we started. We've heard a bunch of this. So this was actually my girlfriend's favorite episode. She loved episode 3 because she doesn't know the inside outs of like how do they decide matches and stuff like that. So like she loved the more behind the scenes deep cut and stuff. And then she's like, wow, they can just really do that to their champion and stuff. And I'm like, yep, he can do whatever he wants. It's his belt at the end of the day. I just got to rant about WrestleMania 3 and Hogan real quick.
Go ahead.
Hogan, why are you lying? First off, Hogan talked about this on a podcast 2 years ago. Andre was 700 pounds, and so that's why he was in bad shape. Not mentioning the back injury at all. Andre was never 700 pounds. Then he talked about how he didn't know if Andre could get slammed anymore because Andre was 600 pounds at this time. So Hogan didn't know if he could slam Andre in the middle of the ring because he weighed 600 pounds. He did not weigh 600 pounds at all. Finally, and one of the last podcasts Hogan did talking about the match, he said him and Andre talked about the match in the back. Him and Andre decided that the body slam would work. He said Andre didn't know if he could jump up for the slam. So why are we now, revisionist history, Hogan didn't know the fucking finish to the end. By the way, I know this interview was in 2021. Hogan has retracted this because in 2022, he told the story about how he knew the finish to the match in 2022 podcast. So how the fuck all of a sudden he's changing the story of this Hogan Andre situation? Oh, I didn't know the finish. And then Vince saying, well, he's a giant. I can't tell him what to do. Vince, you convinced this guy to go to the freaking wrestle at WrestleMania 3. What do you mean you can't tell him what to do?
You convinced him to get back surgery.
Yes. Like, what do you mean you can't convince a giant what to do? Like, what? Especially when we hear Andre's been like the sweetest guy of all time and stuff. Get out of here with this shit. Hogan really pissed me off because at WrestleMania 3, I was just like, I'm like, why is he telling like a different story now? Like, because I was telling my girlfriend this, I was like, this is like the 5th different story he's told about WrestleMania 3. And it's just like, can I get the definitive story, Hulkster? Can I please get the definitive story? So, and
Yeah, I think my favorite episode out of the early episodes is that episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2 was one of my favorites, yes.
Yeah. I think that was one of my favorite. Out of like the first 3, that would be my favorite one. This next episode is called Screw Job. So it was bookmarked by the 2 major screw jobs in WWE history. First, we get the original screw job of Wendy Richter. She is women's champion in 1985. Vince says Wendy was champion and everything was fine for some time, but then she became a problem. He accuses Wendy of not wanting to do business and pass the title on to the next person being Fabulous Moolah, who had always been the next person at that time. So, and a horrible person in herself. She deserves a documentary next. He is a script writer and the championship is his, not hers. She tells him she won't give it up. I'm going to make you give it up then, he says. Vince, I don't know if you should have said that.
Yeah, exactly. Come on, Vince.
We get to the show at Madison Square Garden where Wendy is defending the title against the masked Spider Woman, who is also Moolah, but she doesn't know that. We get Vince notes that you don't fire someone when the crowd is expecting a match because you screwed the crowd. Vince is always thinking of us fans. What a guy. Vince says that it was really easy as he told the referee to count to 3 no matter what. So we see Wendy kicking out and the referee still counts 3. Wendy notes that she lifted her shoulder at 1, but the referee counted anyway. And she says that it was a painful night and she lost her dream. Vince's answer to it not being a fair count, he says, I don't fight fair. Life's not fair. Yo, he said so many incriminating stuff. And yes, Vala B, we did go over the statute of limitations, which is the worst example of that. But to start off this third episode, he said about 3 things already. We're not even through the first 5 minutes of this episode. He says, there's nothing I wouldn't do for the business. That's Vince. So we go over the Hogan basically testifying. Vince says that Hogan was crafty as Hogan gave the government a little of what they wanted, but not exactly what they wanted. Tony Atlas says that the feds called him, but he told them he was taking steroids long before Vince. He notes Vince was okay with them doing steroids, but he didn't tell them to take them. Brett notes all the guys on roids were the main event guys, but he never saw Vince tell anyone to take them. And Dave Meltzer says Vince would just tell guys they needed to go work out. Code for take steroids.
Yes.
Vince knew his life was going to change when the verdict came down. Not guilty. Shane McMahon says that it was a relief. Dave notes that the case never should have gone to trial as they didn't have any evidence. They needed more than Vince just being a bad guy. The trial affected business, though, in a big way. Some executives started fleeing. Business was way down. Brett says business wasn't as good as when Hulk Hogan was on top, and they needed a new face of the company. Enter Lex Luger. Vince says they put the machine behind Lex. Lex was okay, but nowhere near Hogan. Pritchard says that Lex was another in a long train of guys that was trying to fill the shoes of Hulk Hogan. Brett says that the guy that pulled the sword out of the stone was him. I was like, yo, I want to love you, Brett, because you are blatantly honest, but you're also an egomaniac. You're an egomaniac, just like everyone else in this business.
Brett's ego is one of the most underrated egos of all time. How he, like Brett, this is why Punk loves Brett. It's his world. Yeah. Everyone else is just living in it, and they're bugging Bret Hart about stuff. And Brett, he showed that ego in this episode. When people think Brett's this nice, humble guy, I'm like, no, he ain't. Brett is not.
No.
To be somewhat of a top guy in anything, you have to have that weird ego inside of you, that tick that you're better than all these motherfuckers. Like, fuck everyone else. I'm better. Brett showed that in this episode, where if anyone thought Brett's just nice, humble dude from Canada, no, he's a big egomaniac. Bret Hart is. Well, I love Brett because he's honest. He's an honest egomaniac. Yeah. He doesn't tell lies to make himself better. He's just honest about his situation. He's a self-aware egomaniac. I don't think Brett would say he's an egomaniac, but he is self-aware about everything going around him. Just pulling the sword out of the stove. What about Shawn Michaels? What was he doing? Was he helping you hold the sword?
We hear from Shawn Michaels as it talks about Brett helped usher in the new generation era with Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, and Diesel, along with Undertaker as well. Over to WCW, where Ted Turner is throwing out massive amounts of money. He gets Hulk Hogan, he gets Macho Man Randy Savage, and now he's ready to do WCW Nitro in September 1995. They talk about Lex Luger showing up on the show and Ted Turner taking it away. He was throwing money at everyone. Vince says that all he had with guys was a handshake agreement, and that always worked. Now the big bad Turner organization was throwing money at everyone. It's so ironic that Vince is complaining about this.
It's so stupid. Come on, Vince. You just got outplayed. Just admit it. No, come on, Vince. I thought you said telling the truth sometimes is the best. Come on. You can tell the truth here. You're getting outplayed.
Pritchard says WCW one-upped them and they looked like the cool show. He says Eric was ruthless. Eric wanted to be different from WWF, so he went live and was spoiling their shows. We get to Eric giving away the results of the shows and saying Shawn Michaels beat the big guy with the super kick. Heyman also notes that that Vince was in like a tough situation against Eric Bischoff. Eric says that Hogan and Randy told him no matter what he did, Vince would never sell it. Eric kept pushing it, and we see Medusa getting the title and dumping it in the trash. Vince finally reacted with the stupid billionaire Ted skits, and they talk about how there is a lawsuit and USA Network was receiving heat from their friends in Turner about it, and they should have been above taking those shots, says Pritchard, but those skits were how he pieced together that Razor and Diesel were leaving. He asked them to get involved in the skits, and they said no. And he's like, why would you not want to burn the bridge? You must be leaving. Vince had long conversations with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and he realized that they were being offered more money for less dates. Sean says professionally he was happy for his friends, but it just sucked to see his buddies go to the other side. They talk about the curtain call from May of 1996 and how Triple H was the one who got punished for that. Stephanie McMahon says she was in the crowd and part of her thought it was cool, but she figured her dad would be pissed. The Undertaker didn't like it, and Brett says they killed wrestling that day. It's not wrestling anymore. It's entertainment.
Brett.
Vince admits he let it happen, but he can't let it happen again. Kevin and Scott are gone, and they can't be punished. Shawn is WWE champion, shows Triple H was the one who got punished. He was supposed to win the King of the Ring that year, and that all went away. Triple H told Vince the biggest reaction of the night was that moment and told him that the world was changing and they needed to change with it. We go to May 27, 1996, and Scott Hall shows up on WCW, and it starts the NWO. Vince says that all of this, he says that they were stealing from him, claiming that they were Razor Ramon and Diesel on the show. And Vince went into sympathetic babyface mode and was whining like a little schoolgirl, says Eric Bischoff.
He was.
Vince whined that Ted was using his resources in a predatory fashion to put a family business out of business.
A worldwide conglomerate out of business. That's interesting, Vince. Very interesting. They're trying to put a family business that in '92 hosted a show sold out in Europe in Wembley Stadium. That's a family business. I did not know that's considered a family business. No, it is a family business, but now it's a worldwide conglomerate. You're a worldwide conglomerate at this time, Vince. Shut the fuck up.
Dave Meltzer backs up this, noting that this is what Vince did in '84 and '85. That we have Eric Bischoff and Dave Meltzer agreeing on something on this show. So
that was amazing. I could not believe it.
The producer brings this point up to Vince, and he says that it wasn't the same. He says Ted's philosophy was to hurt his competitor, and that's not mine. I wanted to compete.
What do you mean? What you hurt the territories because you told Junkyard Dog, "Oh, I can get you 100,000. Just come here." You told Roddy Piper, "I can get you 150,000. Come here." You hurt your competitors because anytime they built anyone up, you took them. You stole them from them. Like, what do you mean? WCW was just doing the same shit, except they could offer, "Hey, we can give you guaranteed money. You don't have to be on the road. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. You don't have to travel as much." What? Vince is such a hypocrite in this. Like, hurt the business, hurt your business. Yeah, he's hurting your business because he can afford the wrestlers that you can't afford. That's what you did. You told these wrestlers, "I can get you 100,000. I can bring you in. You'll get 100,000." These poor freaking territories couldn't afford 100,000. Back then, maybe the wrestlers 20,000, 25,000 for wrestling in the tour. That's why all these wrestlers jumped around, because they were like, "Okay, I can make 20,000 here, then I'll make 30,000, maybe this one. I know this territory, I can maybe X amount for 40,000, and that will lead it." Vince guaranteed them that they would make more money anywhere else. So this guy's such a hypocrite.
The producers push back, and Vince says, "Yeah, it may sound hypocritical, but he was looking at it for himself. He rambles about how what he says may be different than what he thinks." Vince seems so lost when they push back on him.
Gets
Didn't have
into
Heyman
the
in this
whole
setting, did he?
gets into how Hogan turning heel and joining the NWO, and how WCW became the cool promotion after that. Terry wanted to keep Hogan as a good guy for so long, but him turning heel kind of changed the business. The NWO was born, and WCW had the cool factor. Even Taker says the NWO was cool. WCW started to kick their ass every week, and Eric Bischoff was like, "How many weeks?" He then says 83, about a half a dozen times, and says that they were blowing them out so bad it wasn't funny. The idea was thrown out for Eric to be part of the NWO, and Eric takes the role and becomes successful in it. He then even takes credit. He says, "Yeah, if I didn't do it, then Vince wouldn't have done it." Vince says he they also bring up that Eric Bischoff tried out to be an announcer for WWF, and Vince says that he didn't realize this, but Eric auditioned to be a stickman like Gene Oakland.
He was like, he acted like he didn't even recognize him. Like, oh God, didn't have that charisma that I wanted.
He was like, I don't regret it. I don't like regrets. And then they get into the whole Montreal screw job, and Vince gave Bret Hart like a 10-year contract, but then he has to renege on the contract because he couldn't afford it, and he tells him to talk to WCW and get a deal there. So Bret is going to WCW, but he's still WWF champion, and Vince wants him to drop the title to Shawn Michaels, and Bret responds, "Shawn was a real dick at that time, and it's just the truth."
I have a question. Did they revision history this? Because I always was told Bret was a 20-year contract for like 1.3 million or something like that. But then Vince realized not only could he not afford this, but Bret could actually come back and ask for more money. And that's when Vince realized I couldn't afford this. So he let Bret go because of the fact that because Bret could in the contract could ask for a raise. That's why he let Bret go to WCW. Did they revision this, like saying that was a 10-year? Because I remember he signed for 20 years. I remember it's always been like 20 years in my mind.
I've always heard them. When I heard 20 years, I knew that was bullshit. I knew that story is bullshit. Because they're not doing a 20-year contract. That's why I always say 10, because that sounds more believable. Especially for $1 million. That sounds more believable. 10-year contract than a 20-year contract.
Yeah, because like I heard Bret could actually go and ask for a raise every year. And Vince realized once Bret could go ask for a raise every year, I don't think I can afford that one, Chief.
I ain't doing that. So we bring up Survivor Series 1997. Triple H once again admits he was the one that said, "Fuck that. If he won't do it, do it for him." We get Sean says he met with Vince when he was 23 years old and he owes him a lot. He gets emotional as Vince put up with him when he was in a bad place, so he would do anything for Vince. And then it brings up the whole Montreal screw job and Bret getting screwed. Pritchard said he knew nothing about it, so he was screaming on the headset when the bell rung. Bret then hits the mother of all spitwads in Vince's face. They bring up the whole altercation backstage where Bret talks about how he gave him the punch of his life. He said he went back and they got tied up in a wrestling hold and then he just hits him with an uppercut. The Undertaker has no idea how that punch got through. Bret says probably the best thing I ever did. He deserved it. The controversy after that led to Mr. McMahon becoming a character, and Triple H says in the middle of chaos, genius comes out of it, and we get archival footage of the Mr. McMahon character, which leads into episode 4. Any quick thoughts on episode 3, Screwjob?
I love how there's two sides to the Vince punch story. Vince being like, I'm such a man. I had to let Bret punch me. I had to. And Triple H is like, it was very noble what he did, going out there, getting punched by Bret. And then Undertaker just laughing. He got knocked the fuck out. It was just like Undertaker, who's probably one of the biggest Vince McMahon supporters, just like saying, no, Vince tried to fight Bret, but it wasn't much of a fight. He got knocked out afterwards. So I love the two sides of the story, that Vince was going to be noble and like, I'm going to take a punch because that's what men do. We do these noble things, but in reality, Vince was trying to fight Bret backstage, and then Bret knocked him the fuck out.
So they talk about the Mr. McMahon character more in episode 4, Attitude, which covers the Attitude Era. We get the Brett School Brett character, and that's how the Mr. McMahon character is born. We get Eric Bischoff bringing up how his character predates the Mr. McMahon character. But to be fair, Vince was already a heel in Memphis before even Eric Bischoff. So
Yeah.
Eric, stop blowing smoke up your own ass. They bring out how through 1997, WCW was whooping their ass. They were catering more to kids, so they had to cater more to the 18 to 34 demo, and that's where Attitude is born. Pritchard credits the birth of the Attitude Era to Shawn Michaels wearing the biker shorts with the sock in his shorts, and how he got fined $10,000. Shawn told Vince that he understood, but told Vince to go back and watch and tell him that it wasn't entertaining, and he wound up not paying that fine. He wheels out of it. The Attitude Era is born. Cody Rhodes brings up DX as they were anti-authority. Triple H says that most of the things they were doing, Vince would tell them USA Network is going to kick them off the air, but they did it anyway. And then there's Stone Cold Steve Austin. And they talk about how Austin, of course, took his character and really kind of molded it in ECW. They finally bring up ECW. It was like, are y'all going to bring up ECW and all?
Yeah, come on. Heyman's like Vince's coach in the interviews. We've heard Heyman say, remember this? Remember that? Where's the ECW love? Come on.
They go over how they skipped over him being ringmaster. They just immediately went to him being Stone Cold.
Yeah.
They bring up how Triple H was going to win the King of the Ring, but Austin is picked over him after the curtain call. And then they talk about the whole story of the Austin 316 promo. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff because I'm sorry.
We know.
If you don't know anything about the Attitude Era, this stuff has been covered way too many times, and I'm just skimming through it. So they skip over the Brett and Austin rivalry, which I always hate that every WWE documentary skips over how important that was to the Stone Cold character.
That made Austin. Not everyone will go back to the Austin 316 promo. Like, yes, that helped him become more popular. The image of Brett putting him in the sharpshooter, him bleeding out at WrestleMania 13. That's what made Stone Cold Steve Austin that night. Not Stone Cold saying, you can thump your Bibles, you can say your Psalms, pray to John 3:16, Austin 3:16 said I just whooped your ass. That created Stone Cold Steve Austin, but what made Stone Cold was the Bret Hart feud, and they just never happened. Brett was just an asshole WWF champion. Didn't bring up the fact that Brett was doing some of his best work at that time and anything of that nature. No, Brett just wanted the title for himself and called Shawn Michaels a dick. Fuck him.
They talk about bringing in Mike Tyson for WrestleMania 14 and how big of a deal that was at the time, him coming off of the rape case and Stephanie not knowing that he was still charged for rape at that time. That was a funny little bit there. They talk about how Shawn had a bad back at WrestleMania 14, but Austin still won, and it's all about the moment, not the matchup. And then they get into the Austin McMahon rivalry and how important that was in changing the tide for WWF against WCW in the Monday Night Wars. Mr. McMahon became the most hated character in the history of the business. Vince says he grew up poor and rich people thought that they were better than him, and that made him dislike rich people. He used that for the Mr. McMahon character. He was good at fighting as a kid, and he would win by cheating. He says, I thought rich people would try to intimidate you, and it was easy for me to get into character as I knew all the things I didn't like. Austin notes that Vince can manipulate a crowd as well as anyone, and Vince loved getting heat. Vince says that he shares no traits with the Mr. McMahon character. Shane, his own son, says Mr. McMahon is an extension of Vince, but blown way out of proportion. Hogan says they are the same person. Shawn Michaels says there's not much of a difference. Pritchard says Mr. McMahon is Vince, no matter if he tries to say otherwise. The promos he would cut on camera were the same that he would yell at Pritchard backstage. Producers run that story back to Vince, and he just laughs. He says he's passionate about the business and probably can get out of bounds a bit. Austin says the best characters are those that are themselves with the volume turned all the way up. And Vince says, I'm not that guy. It bothered him that he was seen that way, and he soon learned he couldn't control how people saw him. What did you think about them just flaying Vince?
So when you asked me earlier, what's the Mr. McMahon character related to Vince? 98% is related to Vince. Like, there's the 2% of the Vince that grew up in the trailer park and stuff, but no, 98%. That was just him on TV. That was just who he is on television. Like, I am with everyone else. Like, I don't know, like when Hogan has to say, "Oh, they're just saying," Hogan lies, but I felt truth in that statement. I was like, Hulk Hogan finally told the truth about something. So, yeah.
Lovely stuff. They talk about the rise of The Rock, the rise of DX, and the Attitude Era kind of becoming this big thing. Phil Mushnick brings up how they were like kind of influencing kids in the wrong way with the material that they did. They did a nice little vignette where Vince was like, there was no knives and guns, and they would show Brian Pillman with the gun and the choppy the pee-pee. They talk about Sable and how she was kind of exploited at the time, and they did stuff that they wouldn't do today, like Sable tearing off her top with the hand bikini and more blackface and half-naked woman and Bossman being hung. And then we get to Owen Hart. So the big part with this Owen Hart part, they bring up May 23rd, 1999 and Over the Edge. And the big part of it is when they bring up the Bret Hart comments from 1999, when he says that if that was Shane McMahon, the show wouldn't have continued. And Vince responds by saying, I don't care if that was Shane McMahon. I don't care if that was myself with the blood splattered over the mat. The show should continue. The fans didn't see it. It was in the dark. The fans didn't see it. The fans didn't come to see someone get murdered.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I remember I think a year ago, Monday Night Football, we were actually doing a Rated Raw watch along on this channel. The Bengals were playing the Bills, and we saw one of the Bills players who now thankfully is healthy and playing football, but Damar Hamlin legit died on the football field, and they stopped the game due to player safety and everything. I've talked to someone that was at Over the Edge, and I asked him, did you see it? And he said, yeah, I saw it all. We were all confused what was going on at that time. Like, we didn't know what was happening. There was no announcement. Like, because they didn't hear the JR announcement that Owen Hart passed away. They didn't know the Blue Blazer passed away. Like, they just knew, they saw someone fall. And like, it's like, because my friend said, he always remembers, he's like, Chase, keep in mind, this is not a time and age. There's no such thing as a cell phone or anything. We were all just sitting there, and he was making his entrance, and he just fell. And I was like, holy shit. And he goes, yeah, I just remember he just fell. And we could see it. And I was just like, damn, that's crazy. I talked to him like in 2012, 2013. So it's been a while. I'm no longer friends with him on Facebook. Otherwise, I would have asked him and stuff about this. So I didn't reach out to him. But yeah, crazy that he would continue a show like this, where it's just like, bro, someone died. Like, you got to stop the show. Like, there is no excuse for the show to continue. The house would have understand. You would have been able to do refunds. I mean, and it's crazy too, because a wrestler does die later in the documentary, and they cancel a whole show just to do a tribute show for said wrestler.
And we saw how that worked out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that episode ends with saying Martha Hart settled her lawsuit with the company, and then Martha Hart has recently come out and says that she still blames WWF for the death of Owen Hart, despite Bret on the documentary saying that the investigator said that there was no wrongdoing on WWF's part, so he's let it go.
Yeah, Bret definitely has been like, you know what, he's conceded, like he's just understand. Bret is like the brother in this situation, where he's just like he's let go of like whatever resentment. Martha, I understand why she hasn't let go. Like, that's her husband, that's the father of her kids.
And if you saw the Dark Side of the Ring episode, you would know that there is some negligence on WWF's part.
Oh yeah, no, WWE, like that stunt, like, I don't care how many times you pull it and stuff, you gotta, there has to be practice runs of that. I don't think there was a practice run that night of him doing the entrance. Like, you have to have protection. You have to do it, because like what's the main thing we always get from Vince? Vince wouldn't do anything unless he would do it too. He wouldn't ask you to do anything unless he was willing to do it himself. So it's like I would have been like, if I'm going, hey, is this thing good? Put the because they have like that thing, like the giant inflatable thing to help brace your fall if something like that happens. I would have told Vince, try it out yourself, see if this rigging's good and stuff. Like, I guess Owen just trusted Vince so much, but yeah, no, WWF, that's the negligence on their part. They probably didn't even check if the wiring was good. Like, not every arena is built the same. Like, come on, man. Like, there's certain arenas that are freaking crappy.
And then we get into episode 5, Family Business. This is all about his relationship with Linda and Shane and Stephanie. And I mean, I will say, out of a lot of people that's close to Vince, I think Shane McMahon came off the best in this documentary. And we see how hard his relationship was with Vince. They talk about how Shane and Stephanie basically became, characters on TV at a certain point. Stephanie says things were larger than life growing up, and we see a young Stephanie with Vince and Hulk Hogan and others. We jump to where Triple H slips something in Stephanie's drink, and he gets married to her, and then they talk about the whole relationship between Triple H and Stephanie and how Triple H became a part of it, and that Vince was really kind of pushing Stephanie to be in a relationship with Triple H. This is another episode there. I was like, I know and seen a lot of this. I've already heard a lot of these stories. They totally no mention of the China Triple H relationship. So.
Oh no, why would we? Well, you were talking about the blackface earlier. Kind of funny. Triple H wasn't shown with his blackface on an episode. Let's not paint Triple H in a bad light here. I mean, he's kind of being. Because near the end, they kind of go, "Oh, Triple H, he's done such a great job, blah blah blah," and stuff. So
yeah. They talk about how the McMahons became like center stage to the forefront of WWE TV and the McMahon family drama. And Linda talks about how she was kind of the least comfortable in front of the camera, and we can tell Linda. Vince says she wasn't a good actress, but she knew it. He says she was a great character for what they needed. They talk about the whole angle with Trish Stratus and how Trish was having an affair with Vince, and that was part of the Mr. McMahon character. Trish says she grew up wanting to be a wrestler, and it never fails that after 15 years, people still bring up the whole barking like a dog angle, which still is one of the more disgusting things in wrestling history. Oh, my God. He demands Trish take off her bra, and the crowd is losing it. Dave says that the segment sucked from when he saw it, but wrestling was for guys, and they were into seeing hot women being demeaned. Says a lot about wrestling fans. We go into Vince versus Shane. Shane says they used to wrestle when he was a kid, and Vince would get rough with him. And he told Shane, "I cheat and I win. Sometimes you have to cheat." Shane didn't want to do it, though. He had his reservations about slapping his dad, and Vince says, "I can slap you," and that got Shane comfortable with punching Vince. And we saw the lumps. You saw the black eye on Shane after the matchup. I was like, yo, Vince was shooting on his own side.
Yeah, you talked about I was abused as a kid. Fucking Shane probably was getting more abuse than you, bro. Like, he was getting his ass kicked every day. What the fuck is this?
They bring up the company being sued by Sable and the $110 million lawsuit, and how Sable was even on the Tonight Show discussing why she was suing WWE about being sexually harassed. The producers asked Vince what he remembers about the lawsuit, and Vince doesn't remember anything about it. He says it was a blur. All he knows is that Sable came back to work. And they mentioned the lawsuit on air when she came back to work. They bring up his Playboy interview where Vince talked about having different affairs. Vince says that he as a human is not who the Mr. McMahon character is again, even though Paul Heyman says Vince has one truly monogamous relationship in his life, and it's with the wrestling business. That's about right. Vince takes the company public, and that's a big deal for them. They open restaurants and casinos. He starts the XFL. Over in WCW, they are falling apart. They discussed the AOL Time Warner merger and how WCW was going out of business. And Dave Meltzer says Vince paid $2.5 million for WCW, and he made that back 1 million times over. It was buying, he said it was like buying Manhattan for $24. Always that deal blows my mind. Blows my fucking mind that they sold it for that much. When Eric Bischoff was going to buy it for a lot more. A lot more.
Yeah, exactly. Like that was like the crazy thing. I was like, Jesus.
So they talk about the XFL and how that was a failure, and it leads to the Bob Costas interview with Vince. And oh man, Bob Costas was dropping F-bombs. He says, "I don't give a fuck." Speaking of Bob, he had that tense interview with Vince, and Bob told Vince before the show there would be some tough questions, and Vince thought they were going to talk about the XFL and be friendly. That didn't happen. Vince says Costas started baiting him and that he did his job well. Vince yells at Bob and comes off the hinges. He was set up and was angry at himself for not seeing it coming. The first season of the XFL is the only season of the original incarnation as the XFL folds after one season, and that stung for Vince, and Bruce says that time was not good for him. They also get into the WWF getting lawsued by the World Wildlife Fund and having to change their name to WWE. They touch on the Hulk Hogan versus The Rock matchup at WrestleMania 18 and Hogan and the NWO returning to WWE. And Vince talks about he would work with anybody again. And they talk about Eric Bischoff coming back to the company and Bret Hart coming back to the company. Dave Meltzer says the WWF was white hot from 98 to 2002. And then without WCW to push them, creative fell apart. They talk about how Stone Cold left the company and The Rock left the company. We get the infamous speech from Vince for ruthless aggression. And that brings us to John Cena and him becoming a big star. They talked about how sporadic the Mr. McMahon character was used over the years following that. And the bad creative, like Katie Vick, is shown with Triple H doing that stuff. Steph doesn't want to tell the one story that she refused to do, as it was, he says that Steph was pregnant, and the idea was that Vince was going to be the father of the child.
Vince laughing as he's telling this. Like, you could tell Stephanie, it was so well edited. Stephanie's like, we can talk about anything, just not that. Not that story. And it goes to Vince. So the idea was that Steph was pregnant at the time. And then I'll reveal myself as the father. He's laughing. I'm like, bro, how do you not realize this is a sick individual? He's laughing about this. Like, this is like a serious topic. And he's thinking it's the funniest thing he's ever thought of. Like, I end up being and we all know Vince has like a weird, it's a shame to some degree, has a weird crush on their daughter / sister. Like, Shane said it in an interview. I think my sister's hot. Like, what? Like, here's the thing. I have mostly female cousins. Some of them are good looking, but I would never call my female cousin hot. Like that. Hot. That's what you call a woman you're interested in. Like, I'll say my female cousins are pretty. They're very attractive. Beautiful is like something I also say is a borderline, but I understand some people that will call their cousins beautiful. But I will say that I don't understand how you can call your sister hot. Like, that is just wild to me. Like that's something your friends say to you where you're like, bro, your sister's hot. And it's just like, dude, what? That's my sister. Like, stop. Like, oh, the fascination they have with Steph is so interesting.
Very weird.
Yeah.
Very weird.
It's sickening. It's hideous, to be honest.
And they talk about how Vince wanted to air Triple H and Stephanie's wedding on pay-per-view and how he got mad at her, and it leads to them fighting in an I Quit match just 2 days before the wedding. This family is just demented. This is a demented-ass family.
You won't let me make money off your wedding? Oh, bitch, I'm going to make sure you don't look good in this wedding. I'm like, what?
Whoa, where did this come from? And then they go more into the Vince and Shane relationship. Paul Heyman tells an interesting story about a fight between the two over creative. He says they had a fight over creative, and the fight between them escalates quickly. Vince hands a knife to Shane and told him to stab him in the heart, as that was the only way he would be in a position to make that decision. And if he didn't stick the dagger in his heart, then he knew he wasn't man enough to do it. The only option, the only way that this would happen is to buy him out. And he says that if I don't get it, don't get out of your way, be prepared to get rid of me, like I would have had to get rid of my own father.
I said this. I think Heyman over dramatized the story. I thought it was a great. Paul Heyman did a great job. I really do think Vince did say, you got to stab me for this storyline. I don't think he said all this other stuff that Heyman definitely added that on. Like, this was Paul Heyman making it sound
storytelling.
Like, yeah, this is a Paul Heyman, and Paul Heyman's great at this. Lying, but you believe his lies. Like, you're just like, oh man, I believe this. I was just like, I was not fooled. I definitely think Vince was crazy enough to say, well, if you believe in this storyline, stab me, Shane. How much do you really love this storyline? How much do you love to stab me right here, right here, right here? Like,
right in the heart.
I don't think he said, the only way you're going to get rid of me is by killing me. And then afterwards, you have to buy me out. And I'll be in it. That's Paul Heyman. That felt like something Paul Heyman would be saying in a promo about Roman Reigns or Brock Lesnar. The only way you're getting rid of Roman Reigns is you have to kill him. And then if you try to kill him, I'll be in it. It's like, okay, why are you being a manager right now, Paul? Come on.
We don't believe you, Paul. You got to convince me more. Shane decides to leave the company, and Vince says that Shane wanted to take over and wanted him to step aside. They grew apart and weren't seeing eye to eye anymore. Vince was the boss, and what he said went. So Shane didn't want to see things implode with his father, and Vince notes that everyone has to know their place. Shane's vision may have worked, but this is his business, so it's his vision. He advises anyone not to bring their family into their business. They also touched on Shane wanting to buy like UFC at the time and thought that was a good idea, but Vince didn't see the vision, and that winds up being a bad choice by Vince. Like,
I love how Vince goes, well, I don't know if it would have been 1.4 billion if Shane was running it. All right, Vince, UFC was getting stars. Like, the thing about UFC, they just created stars. As a UFC fan, I know this. They created stars. If anything, Shane would have been able to get Brock Lesnar faster to the UFC. We probably would have seen Kurt Angle fight in the UFC. But I'm sorry, Conor McGregor would still exist even if Dana White didn't have Conor McGregor, because Conor McGregor is Conor fucking McGregor. Ronda Rousey would have still existed, because Ronda Rousey. It's not like these guys were created. Ronda Rousey was fighting for years in the women's MMA circuit before she got her big break at Strikeforce and before she got into the UFC. Conor McGregor, same thing in the Irish. These fighters are around. These guys just you're not just creating these stars. Like, UFC has now leaned into trying to like tell stories with their fights. Like the current light heavyweight champion, Pereira. He was really brought into the company because the former middleweight champion, they had a rivalry from their kickboxing days. Now he's probably their biggest star because he just knocks people out. But he still existed. Like, this guy would still have existed no matter what. These guys are not people that you can just take and make into stars. Like, yes, UFC will force feed people because they believe they can be big stars. But this was like the dumbest thing Vince. He could have bought UFC, but I'm kind of glad he didn't, because otherwise he would have made sure that it would become fake, just like the Japanese MMA scene was. Like, I love you, Minoru Suzuki. Your record is fucking fake, because those fights were fixed. I do not care. Pancrase was all fixed. And anyone that tries to tell you different, they don't know.
Fair. So that was episode 5, Family Business. And then we have the finish, the final episode, part 6 of the 6-part documentary. Before we get into that, we do have our first super chat donation. Thank you so much, Will Chisholm. He says, so that's why Shane don't like Triple H. LOL. Took my girl, yo.
Oh. Well,
You took my spot and my girl.
I was trying to look at rules to see if incest was legal in certain states.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Episode 6, The Finish. It starts off with Vince talking about having two different brains. He says the calls them computers in his head, and they work against him at times. The computer is talking to the producer, and another is thinking about something different. He has a third one he can tap into, and it becomes difficult for him to pay attention at times. And it has bothered him through the years as he just wanted to be normal and fit in. But he deals with it because that's who you are. Just deal with it. Vin says, that's who you are. He says he is at a point where he will be different and fuck the world. The producer asks what the third brain is thinking about now, and Vince says having a lot of fun involving sex.
That's another clip that will be used a lot, for sure.
Episode also starts off with, it says in January 2024, Vince McMahon resigned from WWE after allegations involving sexual misconduct, assault, and trafficking, and the majority of the following interviews, including with Vince McMahon, were filmed before the allegations went public. We start in 2007. They briefly talk about the Battle of the Billionaires with Vince McMahon and Donald Trump, and how Donald Trump was perfect for the role. Bob Costin notes that Donald Trump's persona and attitude is closer to a wrestler than a statesman. But they talk about how Trump hit with multiple freaking wrestling references on the campaign tour before becoming president. Shannon Mazer says Donald Trump shows that pro wrestling seeped into American politics and society. Cena says Mr. McMahon is the greatest WWE personality, but was used sparingly after the Attitude Era. Mr. McMahon, they talk about his midlife crisis around 2007 and how they were doing the who killed Mr. McMahon angle. But that leads into the whole Chris Benoit double homicide, suicide. And I was just like, oh boy, it's been a while since I've heard about this, since the Dark Side of the Ring episode. We start with Vince in an empty arena. I like Brian Gerwitz was good on this part because he noted that they didn't even know what was going on until as the tribute to Chris Benoit was happening. Vince says that
why Regal was all choked up. I was like, okay, that makes more sense now. Like, I was like, who knew? And then I was like, oh, they were knowing as the show was going on. Oh, terrible.
Yep. Vince says Chris was thought of as a great in-ring wrestler, and they all thought a great guy. Brian Gerwitz says they did the tribute show to Chris that night in place of Raw, and they started to get details of what really happened. Chris strangled his wife, smothered his 7-year-old son, and then took his own life by hanging. Cena says the tragedy rocked the foundation of WWE. The media jumped on it, being roid rage. Brett says all he knows is steroids don't make you kill your own family. Vince says there's no correlation between steroids and what Chris did. He says people are flawed and Chris went nuts. It happens every form of life, and that is the only thing he could take away from it. But then we got another fact checker here, Chris Nowinski's here. He talks about how he did the brain scans, getting the permission from his father. And when he heard about Chris Benoit, he thought it was certain that it was CTE, a degenerative brain disease. Symptoms are depression, emotional behavior, aggression, and symptoms get worse. Nowinski believes CTE was the monster and not Benoit. So he did the brain scan and believed that it was that. Vince says that it was a ridiculous statement, and they would show on repeat Benoit doing the diving headbutt. Vince says the headbutt was a complete work, and it looks like there is damage, but there is not. They know what they are doing and don't hurt each other. Then we get one of the stupidest statements of the whole entire docuseries.
Oh, no.
Steve Austin mentions that he was dropped on his head one time, the Owen Hart power driver, and he got a concussion there, but can't think of many other times he had a concussion from wrestling. His take has always been that if you were wrestling and getting a bunch of concussions, you were doing it wrong. I'm not a CTE guy. I just don't believe in it.
scratches the head, back of the head. He knew he regretted that one when he said it. Like Steve, you are a glimmer of hope. Like all you were doing was hanging out with your cat on your farm. Rock is going through a midlife crisis right now after the whole DC thing, and then that one report that came out that he pisses in water bottles or something on set. Hulk Hogan's a racist. Like you are a guy. Like when people say Hogan's a piece of shit, The Rock, he ruined DC, and then Steve Austin, you're a dude. You're supposed to be. I don't think CTE is a real thing, kid. I don't know. And I literally got so annoyed watching this when Hogan's like, wrestling's a work, brother. When I grab the wrist, I'm going, because it's supposed to look.
I was like, oh my God. I was like, all of you people are sounding like the biggest fucking idiots in the world.
Because I literally said this. It does not matter if you are trained or not. You are not trained to fight gravity. Gravity will kick your ass 9 times out of 10. And I love how they freaking show Benoit landing on his head a bunch of times, doing a diving head. You can't control that in the air. Yes, there's a lot of great athletes like Ricochet, high flyers that can contort their bodies. You're just contorting your body. At the end of the day, gravity still wins. It does not matter. You're like, I want
every single time.
I want people that think, oh, they can control how they fall on their head. I want you go on the top of the hood of your car, jump off of it, and see if you can control how you fucking land. Because you can't. You just can't. It's not possible. Gravity wins at all time. I failed at science, and I know gravity would freaking win. It's the easiest formula to understand. Like, holy Jesus Christ, dude. And the concussion thing, I was so pissed about like how they were just like acting like I'm someone, I played football. I've suffered 2 concussions during my time playing football, but concussions weren't treated as serious and stuff. I've had teammates that have actually, committed suicide because of CTE, because they were losing themselves. I actually, when one of my most recent buddies who passed away and stuff, my friend said, Chase, you should do this. Go get a brain scan, check your brain and stuff. So I was for a long time thought I had clinical depression, but it's actually because one of my concussions, it creates so the doctor explained this to me, and I suggest anyone who's had concussions in the past, please do a brain scan. It will help. Told me that I'll have weird lapses of depression because that part of the brain is damaged. And even if you're not depressed, it will force depression on you. So you have to battle that yourself and find ways. No antidepressant will cure this. It is just something from one of my concussions. It's in the back lobe of my brain. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, because I always thought, oh, they told me I was clinically depressed. That's why I feel this way. But but when I would read up on clinical depression, I was like, I don't understand what this is saying. Like, I don't relate to what this clinical depression is. When I did that brain scan last year, it made all the sense in the world. I said, oh, it is because the back lobe of my brain, there's a certain nerve damage that creates depression randomly at random points of time in my life. It's just random. It just comes out of the blue and stuff. So that's why I'm like, please do this and stuff. Like I am pro like supporting concussion, and I believe in CTE, because I've seen two people take their lives away because they became someone who they aren't. And I think that's what happened to Benoit. Steroids, as someone who has used steroids in the past, they do have nasty side effects. Roid rage is not like that. Roid rage is totally different. It's like, it's an anger, but it's not one that causes you to snap like that. It literally doesn't cause you to snap and become this terrible monster. Like Benoit definitely got angry one day, and then his CTE just flared up and stuff. Like it causes you to do stupid things. So please, if you guys have had concussions, if you guys do have good medical insurance, I understand most people don't, do a brain scan with a brain professional. It will answer a lot of questions, because that answered a lot of questions for me. Because I was told when I was 19, oh yeah, you just have clinical depression, take these antidepressants. And I was just like, I don't understand. This doesn't correlate to me. That now it makes sense. Now I'm like, okay, I'm tapped in.
I was just like, oh God, why do they let these people talk? Why don't they have like a publicist or somebody
right
to like be there to help them?
We know Dwayne's publicist stepped in because he was barely in the documentary. He just said a couple like, oh yeah, WWF, oh Hollywood, oh I'm The Rock, work out at 4 a.m, cleaning and banging. Okay, Dwayne.
They talk about the wholesale changes that went down following this due to, Chris working with Vince McMahon. Vince blames all of this, openly choosing to use prescription drugs to make them feel good and having that mixed with alcohol and steroids. He says that it's a horrible cocktail. Phil Mushnick asks why these deaths aren't page one of every newspaper. And again, McMahon escaped it. Dave credits Vince for the good changes that were made as they treated concussions with more care and concern. They had been more monitoring of drug abuse and agreed to pay for rehab to anyone under contract, even if they ended up leaving the company. The schedule was reduced and it was even better now, and the changes have been gigantic. They then talk about WrestleMania 30 with Undertaker, brings up his streak and how it became a major attraction for WrestleMania. Vince says Mark wasn't prepared for Vince to make the decision to have him lose the streak against Brock Lesnar. And Taker says he was concussed 5 minutes into the match and went another 25 minutes. To this day, he doesn't remember being in the matchup. Vince says a concussion may have happened, but he thinks Mark can't remember the match because it was so traumatic. He thinks this is...
Mark, you're losing the match. I'm sorry, Brock's winning. Oh. Undertaker.
All a blur. It's all a blur.
Undertaker, who has been in the business, Vince, for almost 30 years at this point. He can't take a win-loss. Like, you're telling me that this thing really, shocked his psyche. It just put him in an emotional shock. Like, this guy has not walked out on you. This guy has been your loyal soldier. He says he will take a bullet for you. And you're telling me, there was no concussion. He was just shocked that I decided that he was going to lose a match. I'm pretty sure if Undertaker, if you pulled down your pants, you told Undertaker, suck it, he would do it because he is that loyal to you. He is that loyal to you. You're telling me that he was emotionally shocked. No, this is just being ignorant now. Like, how he was concussed. You could tell, his face, the minute he took that suplex. Well, and it's not to Brock's fault. It's just shit happens in wrestling matches. It just happens. Brock, look, we've seen Brock throwing people around. I think being thrown around by Brock Lesnar probably is more safe than being thrown around by, Braun Strowman. Okay, Brock, no, yeah. Brock is a different animal when it comes to controlling his strength, farm boy strength and everything. But to say that he did not have a concussion, you went with him to the hospital. Motherfucker, you left your show to go with him to the hospital. You literally think that was just you telling him you're losing a match? That's why he had to go to the hospital? He was just emotionally depressed. They don't take you to the hospital because you're like, I'm just in shock. No, they take you to the hospital. Oh my God, he's so stupid.
Stupid. They talk about the change to PG and how the business change and how the on-screen product change. Heyman brings up the women's revolution, how it coincided with the TV PG, and how Stephanie was a big part about that. They also talk about Triple H becoming the number 2 to Vince. And then they bring up where was Shane, and Dave Meltzer says Shane was kind of out of it for the most part. And then they bring up Shane's return in 2016. He gets really emotional talking about the crowd reaction that night. They talk about WrestleMania 32 and his performance there against The Undertaker. They talk about how Shane always put his body on the line doing crazy stuff. They go back to King of the Ring 2001 when he had that big matchup with Kurt Angle. And Booker says, I felt for Shane that night. He took it like a champ. But he talks back to WrestleMania and his performance there, and they have the touching moment backstage with Vince actually giving a hug to Shane and Shane saying to Vince that he just always wanted him to tell him that he was proud of him. Triple H brings up how some of the wrestlers will say Vince was a father figure to them, and Taker, Trish, and Cena all say the same thing. Taker says, honestly, I would take a bullet for that man. So you're probably right about sucking it.
He would.
They talk about the difference between
the Undertaker documentary. No, the Undertaker documentary really ruined Undertaker for me because I truly think Vince and Undertaker are secret lovers. There's a part in the documentary.
Secret lovers.
There's a part in the documentary. Undertaker's just standing backstage, and Vince comes behind him and tickles him. I'm like, yes. What? Look, when you have a bro friend, you do kind of sus things. I have never tickled one of my bros. I have never gone up to one of my bros, and tickled them like that. That's flirting. Like that's like something you do to a girl. You're like, oh, let me make you.
That's something I do to my missus. That's something I do to my missus.
Like, what is this? Like, this is it ruined Undertaker for me because it just made. And then Vince too couldn't even say anything about Undertaker. Like what does Undertaker mean for you? Like, if I was to do a documentary and if someone was all like, I'm going to use Steve because he's one of my best friends at this. And someone said, Chase, what are your thoughts on Steve? I'm not going to be like, can't talk about it. It's too emotional. I would say what I have to say. What do you say? You can't. You guys are secret lovers. I do not want to hear it. Hear anyone say, no way. But Undertaker, hey, just because you're far right does not mean you can't be gay. All right. So it does not matter. So.
Good point. Tony Atlas says that Stephanie is just like her dad and Shane is nice. Atlas continues that you can't be nice and be the boss in the wrestling world. Tony Khan, we're talking to you. He continues that with Stephanie, you can't take advantage of that woman. Vince, Stephanie, and Triple H were the three most powerful people in WWE. They talk about the big launch of the WWE Network, TV rights deals exploding, the huge deal with Peacock. They talk about Linda McMahon joining the Donald Trump cabinet. And then we get even AEW footage, how another competitor sparked up in 2019. And one of the founders and biggest stars, Cody Rhodes, eventually leaves the company and joins back up with WWE. The stock price keeps soaring, and Shoemaker says they didn't have any vitality of Hogan's era in the 80s and certainly not of the Attitude Era, but Vince kept creating new stars that became huge faces, and you see Batista, Randy Orton, and the lot. Roman Reigns. Because of the success of Roman Reigns, it seemed like if Vince ever stepped down, it would be Triple H and Stephanie next in line. Shawn Michaels says that he's above his pay grade, but he heard Triple H was next in line. There is a successor plan, and Vince tells the producer he never sees himself retiring. When you stop growing, you die. What are you going to do when you retire? So go die.
Oh, Vince, guess you should die then, huh? You shouldn't be around anymore.
They show Vince in his last match at WrestleMania 38, taking the worst stunner ever. And then we go to June 2022. Vince McMahon steps down as CEO as allegations he paid $3 million in hush money to a former employee he had an affair with. Ted Mann from the Wall Street Journal says he started with a tip with the board, received an anonymous email about Vince covering up an affair. Vince paid $100,000 and increased to $200,000 when they started having sex. Dave wonders how consensual it could be when one person is your boss and also the boss is Vince McMahon. People are reluctant to speak because of Vince's power, and Dave was shocked that Vince didn't go after the reporters because he's done that in the past. Vince does decide to come out on SmackDown and they replay that footage. Oh my God. I still to this day am ashamed that was in Minnesota or something with them. Yeah. Oh. Everyone cheered Vince, and this was his FU to the story. We have an empty chair now. As it says, after the allegations became public, Vince McMahon canceled his final interviews. The reporter says, when the story was reported, some reacted, "What did you expect?" The character, Mr. McMahon, was a sex addict who made out and flirted with the divas, and what complicated matters was the blurring of the lines of Vince and Mr. McMahon. What the report showed was some of the aspects that were played for laughs with the character were not actually funny. They found more allegations as a tanning salon in 2006 when Vince showed a worker naked photos. Prosecutors didn't think that there was anything there to pursue charges, and they noted Vince denied the allegations. They also show how they played on those allegations with Mickie James doing the same thing in a story in 2006. The more they reported, the more people came out, and Vince was accused of paying $12 million to 4 different women, and one settlement being $7.5 million with a former wrestler over oral sex when she wouldn't do more. He didn't renew her contract. Dave notes that Vince was always the guy you figured would survive everything, but 2 weeks later, he retired on a Friday afternoon. We get the big Stephanie McMahon thank you Vince speech on SmackDown, which to this day is also very disgusting. Cody Rhodes admits that it was chaos backstage as nobody knew what WWE would look like without Vince. I love the fact that they interviewed Cody after the fact of all of this. Yeah. Dave is asked if he thinks Vince will ever be back because it's wrestling. He says, I would say yes. And then we get to January 2023. Vince McMahon has returned as executive chairman of the board. Stephanie steps down as co-CEO, basically not wanting anything to do with all of this. Triple H was put in charge of creative while Vince was trying to ruin everything. They go to January 2024 and they bring Dave back and he laughs and says that it was weird. Cody says he wasn't surprised, and was surprised that people were surprised. Dave had heard that Vince was getting itchy, but didn't know that if he could return. They include that Steph and Triple H had voted him out, but he still forced his way back in, redoing the board of directors. Pritchard says he has no clue what happened with Stephanie and takes shots at Dave Meltzer and Shoemaker for making up lies. They don't know. Vince does the deal to sell WWE to Endeavor, who also owns UFC. It's to form a $21 billion company named TKO. We get evil mustache Vince on the news stories and everything. Dave says the company is doing the best they've done since 2002. Profits and revenue were bigger. They asked Bruce Pritchard the day of the Netflix and WWE deal about what he saw in the episodes and what he thought, and he says he thought it sucked. He didn't think that they were balanced. He felt like it was a got you, Pete, and how they could make Vince look bad. I mean, the man did it himself when he said he had raped raped the statute of limitations. Like, what do you expect? Pritchard says that Vince is a businessman, and the other side is that Vince made sure Bruce's wife had the best care when she was diagnosed with cancer. That's you. That doesn't excuse him for what he did to other people.
Yeah, exactly.
And then,
like, just because he did something nice to you, just because he did something nice to you, does not make it like look. When you're friends with someone, you're gonna always see them in a clouded way. Like that's just how life is. Like if Steve did something bad, I would be all like, "Oh, Steve, you fucking idiot." But I would still kind of be, maybe not out there, but I would still be a supportive friend if Steve needed one. Because I've had it before where a friend did something stupid and I left him in the dust, and then he ended up killing himself. And then I was just like, Jesus. And then afterwards, I felt fucked up for a minute because I thought, what if I was still around? And then a group of us that were friends with this guy, I thought I was fucked up for thinking this, but then more people revealed they wish they were still, in touch with him. And I was just like, okay, I'm not that fucked up and stuff. Like, you can still be a friend. You don't have to be a dick sucker for the guy live on the thing. Like, you can admit that your friend is a piece of shit. Like, yes, okay, cool. Like, he helped your wife with it. Like, he can do nice things. Bad people do nice things all the fucking time. That's just how it is. It's like you can't. Like, just because like he showed a kind of friendship to you does not mean so when I had cancer, can I go to Vince's store and be all like, hey Vince, I have colon cancer, do you think you can help me out? Vince is going to give me the best care. No, he's not. So that because I'm not his friend. He does not. He's just like, who are you? Oh, I'm a fan of WWE. Fuck you, get out of here, go die. Like that's how the conversation would go.
Life's not fair, and then you die.
Yeah, exactly. Like Jesus. That's why, like Pritchard, when he's trying to tell this sympathy story to make it see Vince is not that bad. He's nice because he's your friend. It's not like Vince is doing this for anyone else in the world. Like you, Undertaker. That's it. He ain't doing it for his wife.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, he ain't doing it for
Triple H.
Stephanie, maybe Stephanie's in that list. She's not doing it for Shane.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't think so after she stepped down. Yeah.
Yeah. Stephanie's not on the list anymore. Yeah. So everyone else, he wouldn't do anything else for. Hogan, if Hogan asked him for something, he'd be like,
Kevin Dunn.
Oh yeah. Well, Kevin Dunn saved the industry. If he did, by the way, Kevin Dunn did not get his flowers. Why did they not mention Kevin Dunn running to the exploding car, saving all the tape library of the W? If Kevin Dunn does not do this, WWF is dead. And they do not get, like, for all the complaints Kevin Dunn has, come on. Like, you got to give him his flowers here that he saved WWF by going into an exploding car to get the tape library.
And then 2 days later, after freaking Pritchard said this, the Janelle Grant lawsuit comes out. There is no coming back from this one.
Nope.
We hear from the reporter from Wall Street Journal. She was tipped off about the lawsuit coming, and it happens because she had been writing about sex trafficking suits. She believed WWE was shocked by the suit and didn't see it coming. Grant alleges in the suit, of course, that Vince forced her to have sex with him and other men at WWE HQ for job security. Grant was the first woman they reported on back in 2022. And I think this is the first time that was confirmed, that Janelle Grant was the first person that they reported on back then. Talks about how, Brock Lesnar was involved in the suit. Vince denies all the allegations, but resigns from TKO the next day out of respect for the WWE universe, quote unquote. After Grant came forward, other stories started sparking up. They briefly talk about Ashley Manzaro claiming that she was raped on a WWE tour of Kuwait by a man posing as a military doctor. She accused WWE of not responding and that WWE covered up it to protect the business. What she claims happened is frightening and sickening and even hard to read. Her account, sadly, Mazzaro was found dead in an apparent suicide, but her attorney released a statement after the Grant lawsuit came out. Vince was removed from his job, sold all of his stock for billions, and has basically vanished. What's amazing is that WWE has thrived without him. And we see Stephanie McMahon showing up at WrestleMania 40. We see Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns with Cody winning. And Triple H thought we destroyed all gates, and this is legitimately the biggest WrestleMania of all time. And then it basically ends with a kind of a smorgasbord of everybody being asked the question, what is Vince McMahon's legacy? And I think that's enough covering of this that we can just finish off with our thoughts of the entire documentary and what we think is Vince McMahon's legacy coming out of this after watching the 6-part series and being wrestling fans for the better part of 3 decades between the two of us. What do you think, Chase, is Vince McMahon's legacy?
A ruthless promoter that took a niche sport and made it a worldwide conglomerate. He is a definition of a success, but ultimately he's tarnished because of what he did outside of business. Because he decided to do things that most despicable people do, and you can take the trailer trash out of the trailer, but at the end of the day, he's always going to be trailer trash. Hey, shout out to him. He took a niche scene like wrestling and made it into a worldwide conglomerate. I got to give him that props, but other than that, he's a piece of shit. Like, that's just it. Like, he's just a piece of shit at the end of the day.
Yes, I think that's the best way to kind of put it. He's an all-timer entrepreneur and businessman that took something that, probably wouldn't be as big without him into something that is a part of like the fabric of Americana. But at the end of the day, he got all this power and he abused it. He abused it in the worst way possible and caused a lot of harm to a lot of innocent people that did not deserve it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's what I tell people. The situation that you grow up in, it never leaves you. Like that's why it's just like when people grow up in certain situations, it's like that's what they know. Vince was always trailer trash. He just somehow got money and power. And, when you talk about, I never liked rich people, they looked down on me. You became what you hated, and you didn't know how to handle it. And it was because it was such a foreign concept to you, you just didn't know and stuff. And like, I hate the wrestling Twitter accounts. Oh, how can you support WWE if Vince is running it? I don't know. How's your Amazon Prime order going? Did you order something off Amazon lately? Did you get gas recently? Did you do anything? Did you buy from this company?
Everything we watch, we do, it has someone that is evil part of it.
Like that. That's why I hate when people do that. Like, I know Vince is a piece of shit. I watch the product. I'm watching what the product is and stuff like. Dude, if I found out Tony Khan murdered someone or something, I'm still watching AEW. It's not make me. I can't support it. A murder was behind the scenes. No, it's a product I'm watching. It does not affect my view of a product. I'm not thinking, man, Chris Jericho probably covered it up or something. Like, that doesn't cross my mind. That's not stuff that crosses my mind when
I
watching.
hate on Chris Jericho because he's not entertaining as a character on TV anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't hate him for the allegations that are out there about him, even though I understand if people do. I understand both sides of the spectrum, but I can watch something and take it at face value.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing. But yeah, no, Vince is just like, when you just grow up like that, you're just going to always be a trailer trash. Like, I always knew Vince was going to be like, that's why it never shocked me when these Janelle Grant things came out. I wasn't shocked. I was just literally like, well, about time he got caught for something. Because, like, how many times has he cheated on his wife? Like, they've talked about him cheating on Linda McMahon and everything like that. Like, you're telling me a billionaire in a business, and keep in mind, Vince never grew up. He was always just he still probably thinks this is like the 80s. He can get away with anything. Like, nothing was going to come up. Or that's like, you don't think what happened to Kevin Spacey, that wouldn't have happened to you eventually? Like, you should have saw I'm not saying I'm this type of person, but if I was Vince in that situation, once Kevin Spacey got caught with Me Too, whatever bullshit I have, calling my lawyers, washing my hands, hey, make sure this never sees the light of day. Pay any hush money to all my victims. Make sure they're taken care of, because I know I have the money to take care of them. And I am staying as clean as possible for the next lifetime of my life, because I know I could get caught up. Sure, shit could come up.
But he thought he was untouchable. That's the thing.
Yeah, because that's how he grew up. That's how it was in the 80s. That's how it was in the 90s. He did not adapt, and that's why he's in the situation. Because, like, say the Janelle Grant stuff gets brought up, right? But it happened like 2009, and nothing else comes up from 2009 to like 2024. Hey, guess what? Vince could say, yeah, I was a piece of shit back then, but I changed, da-da-da. And it's like, okay, there's nothing else that really popped up, so this is just one outlier. That's the problem. Now there's a bunch of different cases coming out on you, and this is on you. You did this to yourself. You tarnished your legacy. You're not going to be as celebrated as the person that you should be celebrated as, and that's on you. I can't have sympathy for that. You decided to be an idiot.
This whole documentary became a half and half, where people were able to celebrate what he achieved, and then you ended on a way that it's like all of that is null and void. You will never hear these people talk in this, or you shouldn't never hear these people talk in the same fashion about Vince McMahon that they did in this documentary ever.
Yeah. That's why they have to preface, this was filmed in 2021, because they did not want people, because look, Bill Simmons, he's on and off again a hardcore wrestling fan. David Shoemaker is a hardcore wrestling fan. They know how wrestling Twitter is. Like, they even made fun of wrestling Twitter during the podcast that they did, saying like, oh yeah, they were gonna come after us and all this other stuff. Like Shoemaker's like, yeah, I haven't opened my Twitter. I'm afraid of the notifications and everything, because wrestling Twitter, look, wrestling Twitter is funny. For 24 hours, they'll care about something, and then they won't act like they won't act like they spent like 5 hours a day arguing about something. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, weren't you guys just arguing about this like a day ago? Like, now it doesn't matter? Like, huh? I don't get this.
But that's gonna bring us to a close on this documentary review. I did not expect this to go as long as it did, but I think we gave a thorough breakdown of each episode and our thoughts on everything. So I want to thank Chase for joining me today. Thank you all. If you joined us live, you're watching on demand. And the next documentary or the next season of Dark Side of the Ring, that's the next time we'll go in depth into this. But any news and notes about the Vince McMahon documentary or anything else from the last week since our podcast last Saturday, we'll cover it tomorrow on the flagship True Hill Heat 297. But Chase, want to thank you once again for joining me and give you the floor. Let everybody know where they can follow you.
Yeah, you guys can follow me at Chase Oliver 68, Around the Point Network. We're not doing anything right now, like probably next week, but tomorrow going to be on here for the watch along. We're playing the Fuck Is This Bingo. It's the Chase Oliver Bingo. You guys can get, it's all common things that I do on stream. You guys can get bingo. I'll reward the first person to get bingo $50, only for Bad Blood watch along, not for the UFC watch along, because we'll be tired after that. So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now.
You can follow me on the Twitter machine at True Hill SP3. You can follow the gang, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at True Hill Heat. Patreon.com/True Heat, the best place to support us when we are not live here. But we want to see your support tomorrow, 11:05 a.m. Eastern Time. The True Hill Heat flagship podcast will be talking about the AEW massive TV deal with Warner Brothers Discovery and what it means for the future of AEW and pro wrestling overall. We'll talk about NXT's debut on the CW. We'll talk about Seth Rollins' return, Cora Jade's return, MVP bringing in Shelton Benjamin and possibly Bobby Lashley into AEW, and of course, final predictions for Bad Blood. If you want to see Bad Blood predictions, you can see me, Maggie, and Robert D. Felice from earlier this week with our preview of WWE Bad Blood tomorrow night. And speaking of which, join us live 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Chase will be there. Romeo will be there for our Bad Blood watch party. And check out AE Ramble, episode 166, talking about AEW Dynamite 5-year anniversary this week. Whole bunch of content from this week. So hope you enjoyed and got something from the last 2.5 hours of us talking about Mr. McMahon.
If you're someone that you don't want to watch the whole 6-hour team, just watch this. SP3 pretty much covered everything in 2 hours, so you don't have to watch it. You don't have to hear Vince talk and stuff. SP3 covered it.
You won't hear Vince sound like a frog for 6 hours. So for Chase, it is me, your True Hill Phenom SP3. This has been our Mr. McMahon Netflix Docuseries review. We are signing off until next time.